territory. We acknowledge all Indigenous people who have made Calgary their home. This site, where the Bow and Elbow rivers meet, was historically a place of confluence where the sharing of resources, ideas, and opportunities naturally come together. Long before Scottish settlers named it Calgary, it was traditionally known as Moginsis to the Blackfoot, Wechispa Oyade to the Stony Nakota, and Gutsis to the Tsuut'ina. On this land and in this place, we strive to learn together, walk together, and grow together in a good way. Welcome to the Building a Better World workshop, jointly hosted by the Environmental Sustainability Rotary Action Group and the Rotary Action Group for Community Economic Development, or RAGSED. I'd now like to introduce Carl Trelevin, who's the Master of Ceremonies for today. He's currently chair of the Rotary Action Group for Community Engagement, Community Economic Development, past district governor, past Rotary Foundation Committee chair for his district, and a member of the Rotary Club of St. Petersburg, Florida. Carl?
Thank you very much, Karen. Good morning to everyone, both to those of you who are here in Calgary at the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, and also to those of you who are watching us online around the world. We have people as far away as India and Australia and an unimaginable number of places in between. So we're really happy to have everyone here with you. And as Karen said, our program today is about building a better world. Now, here's my question for you. When you think about building a better world, building anything, what do you need? Well, tools, of course. And chances are you all have tools already. The question is, what are the tools that you have? Oftentimes, you go to your toolbox, what do you pull out? Well, I usually like, my favorite tool is a hammer, all right? I like to hammer things. The problem is, you know, if the only tool that you have in your toolbox is a hammer, what happens? Every problem looks like a nail. And obviously that isn't going to work very well. So hopefully we can expand our toolboxes. Now, I mentioned to you that our group, we've got people listening in from all around the world, but we've got a room full of people right here in Calgary, and I certainly like to recognize you. So I'm curious, who here is from Europe? So we got a number of people from Europe, great. Anyone from Asia? Right, or Latin America? Ah, great, welcome. And anyone here from the United States besides me? Yeah, I guess a few of you here. And then, of course, our host here, Canada. How about those of you from Canada? Of course, absolutely. Very welcome. What? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, you're right. Well, before Antarctica and Australia. Wonderful. Okay, great. And Africa. I'm obviously being. We're very happy to have all of you here, and hopefully the next time we do this, we'll have even more people coming from different places. So now, the topic today is really focused upon the environment and upon climate change. It's a concern to everyone in this room and everyone who's watching us over the internet. And there seems to be a lot of bad news, but I want to start off with a couple things that I think are really good news. The first piece of good news, reportedly in April of this year, just 6 weeks ago, for the very first time ever, more power was generated by solar panels than by nuclear power worldwide. That will only get better. Second piece of good news. You know, people are concerned about recharging batteries in cars. Well, there is now a technology available where you can pull into the station and instead of recharging, get a new battery. The time to put the new battery in your car, 90 seconds. You can't even get a cup of coffee in 90 seconds. And now potentially recharge your car. Is that a game changer? Absolutely, it's a game changer. So with that, let's talk about that toolbox again, mine and yours. What's in the toolbox? And as I said, if you depend upon one tool too much, you may not get what you want. So let's think about it. And I'm reminded in situations, So we as Rotarians are obviously concerned about doing projects that are both impactful and sustainable. We'll be thinking about that. That's an important one. So what's in that toolbox to help you? Well, I want to turn our attention to Archimedes. Anyone remember Archimedes? A Greek who lived in the 3rd century BC. And Archimedes is best known for saying, give me a lever and a place to stand, and I will move the earth. What was he talking about? Well, he was talking about something almost like this. A lever. This is a small version of it. And with a lever, you can move things. And if you have a big enough lever, you can move the world. So the tools I want to talk to you about today aren't hammers. I want to talk about levers and different ones that we might have. So let's start with the first one you may not be thinking of. Let me get this working. There we are. And it goes back to the beginning of Rotary. And you may recall that Paul Harris organized our great organization in 1905, along with 3 other fellows. What was he doing? Was he interested in service? No. He didn't organize this to be a service organization. He was looking for a way to meet people and improve his business. So he was a lawyer. You would think the obvious thing he would have done is, well, go meet other lawyers, right? But in fact, what he did was intentionally go find people in other professions. Why? Because the idea was he could connect a bunch of people together, and that would provide much more power than he would have otherwise. In effect, he created the very first network. And they were able to help each other out. They really leveraged their time and their resources. Well, that was a brilliant idea of his, number one. His second brilliant idea, though, was then to realize that you could take that very same network and put it to use to help others, to be of service. And we use that same idea of our vocations and the networks we create to accomplish great things. And in our individual Rotary clubs, that's what we do. We assemble people, and with that, we can solve just about any imaginable problem in our particular town or city. Well, what happens, though, when you try to do a problem beyond your particular town or city? Well, it gets a little harder. Now, we have people here who could probably solve any imaginable problem in Calgary, but what happens when you go across the ocean? Well, that's where we have another tool of leverage called Rotary Action Groups. SRAG is one of them, RAGSED is another. And why our groups exist is literally to help Rotarians just like you, your clubs, to extend your reach, your leverage beyond your particular club all around the world to accomplish so much. These are two. We have 26 action groups altogether. And let me take a moment. I believe Zuhal, you're still here? Great. Well, introduce Zuhal Sharp, who is from Evanston, a Rotary coordinator of all the action groups. So that's another point of leverage, but there's more to it than just that. Our foundation, the Rotary Foundation, more than anything else, provides tremendous leverage to all of us. How does it do it? Well, it does it because the money that we raise in our clubs and from others, that money is matched in so many ways, oftentimes as much as 2 or 3 times. Great additional financial leverage that we gain from that, plus expertise out there. Oops. Now, what else? Well, the next form of leverage, of course, is our third-party organizations. And the perfect example I offer you of that is Rotary's signature project to eradicate polio. And when we started doing that, what did we do? Well, we signed up the World Health Organization, the CDC. Later, we signed up the Gates Foundation. And where would we be in the process of eradicating polio if we didn't have them with us? Now, for this case, we're Rotary clubs all over the world, and we will be far more successful. We will have far more leverage if we hook up with the right third-party organizations out there. And there are all kinds of them out there that can amplify what we're trying to get done. So take us back here to Archimedes. And if Archimedes obviously never contemplated the idea of global warming or climate change, but if he were here today, I'm confident he would say, for all of us, if we're trying to do something in our clubs and Rotary to resolve the problem of climate change, then let's use leverage. Let's leverage our efforts. I've described to you some other forms of leverage today that maybe you hadn't thought of that will help amplify the power and success of the projects that you're doing. So, oops. Must be gone. Oop. Clicking too fast here. So, our agenda. We're going to have, starting off, we'll have a keynote speech, and then we will have a panel of distinguished people who are to talk about different things than we do. We'll give you an opportunity to ask questions. We'll then have a presentation by Brenda Davis. That will cover our morning session. We'll then have lunch, and then this afternoon, we'll be breaking into individual groups to discuss project ideas that you brought here to our presentation, and we'll talk about ways that you can take those, you can amplify them, leverage them to turn them into really successful, highly impactful projects for your club, for Rotary, and for the world. So with that, I would like to call upon Neelam Beatty. Neelam is from Toronto, and he is connected with both SRAG and with RAGSED. He serves as RAGSED's technical officer, and pleased to welcome him to introduce our keynote speaker. Neelam?
Thank you, Carl. Welcome all over here and online. And it really gives me great pleasure to invite David, who I'm getting into the habit of introducing him at a club level, at a district level, and now at an international convention. So perhaps one of these days, we'll put him in the plenary with the whole 30,000 people. And I think David is probably one of the most qualified folks anywhere in the world to speak about climate change and the task ahead in a way that is unique. The fact that he has all the credentials, you talk about his education and his bio is up there. I'm not going to read line by line all his accomplishments, but I recall meeting him back in the days when he was running for the mayor of Toronto. He's been a political activist. And as this mayor of a big city, he was mindful of the responsibilities that were on his, the trust that the people put on his shoulders. And he has never shied away from thinking creatively and pragmatically. And so as the managing director for C40, we should remind ourselves that as the world changes, the political whims and the breezes that flow sometimes discourage us. However, things are not necessarily dictated by governments by dictum or by international organizations. You look around, when I travel to any place, you look around the local environment. Who's responsible for that? It's the people and the local government, be it the municipal government, the city government. So I think you will need to pay close attention to what David has to say. And as we are charting our way, creating partnerships with other civic groups, and I think we will be rethinking about some of our approaches. So with that, David, I'd like you to come and say a few wise words. And he has agreed. We are lucky to have him today because he's on his way to Europe and he's decided to take a break in between, especially to meet the group here. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Neelam, for that gracious introduction, and members of Rotary here and around the world, thank you for your very warm welcome. But more importantly, I want to thank you for your work. One of my responsibilities at C40, which I'll get into in a moment, but is to help connect our mayors with the latest research to help their work on climate change. And the latest research shows that it's not always the message that matters, what politicians and others say about climate change, it's the messenger who talks about it. And Rotary, because of your unique network globally and within countries based in local communities and local neighborhoods, is perfectly placed to be that messenger. So I really want to thank all of you for organizing this action group and really putting Rotary in a position to make a very big difference indeed on climate change. Second thing I wanted to say is I first ran for office rather a long time ago now, in 1991. And my very first speech was at a breakfast meeting of the Parkdale Rotary Club in Toronto. So I have fond memories. I was exceptionally nervous because, of course, I was a very, very young man indeed. As a teenager. Whoops. Okay, I used to be able to press these properly. Oh yeah, sorry about this. There we go. Okay, so my talk is called While Nations Talk, Cities Act. And I'm speaking from my experience of nearly 30 years being involved with the city-based climate movement. And I think the city-based climate movement is extremely relevant to Rotary because you're grounded in community and about community. And while many of the initiatives I'm talking about here are at a scale, a citywide scale, I think you'll see how many of them can be applied to communities and to networks. And I hope it gives you hope, first of all. From a climate perspective, it's a difficult time politically at the moment. It's quite challenging, but cities are still acting and still making change. So are communities, so are people, so are young people. And I hope if you see what the great cities of the world are doing, it gives you hope, both for action and to show that we still can address the climate crisis. I was really struck by the G7 in Kananaskis, a couple hours from here. We had the world's leaders there, the world's leaders of the Western countries, and the backdrop was climate-induced wildfires all across Canada, where the smoke is so bad it's going as far as Portugal. You know, there are health alerts in places like Toronto, my home city, because of wildfires in Manitoba, Alberta, all across the Canadian West. And this isn't even really wildfire season. You know, there's a town near here, it's not on my slide, but there's a town near here called Jasper. It's about 6 hours from Calgary, that almost completely burnt down last year. A third of its buildings disappeared because of a climate-induced wildfire. And so we know from the science, climate change is real. I know I've spoken to a couple of Rotarians this morning who've spoken to others in Rotary who say, no, climate change doesn't exist. Well, it does. It's real. It's us. It's human caused. And it's really serious. And these are just a few examples. You know, I could prepare a new slide every single time I speak, and I speak pretty much every week on the latest climate-related floods, fires, migrations, droughts, food scarcity, all of that. It's extremely serious. It's real, and it's acknowledged by all the scientists. And just in case you need a bit of reinforcement, this shows where the temperature is going. The big thing to take away is we're almost at, some scientists say we're at 1.5 degrees average global temperature increase over pre-industrial levels, and that is thought to be a tipping point. So there is a real urgency in acting, and that's what those slides show. The interesting thing, and I think it's a really critical point, research still shows that the vast majority of people everywhere around the world, it's a little bit less in oil producing areas like here in Alberta or in Texas, but even there, majorities understand that climate change is real, it's human caused, and it's a problem, and it comes predominantly from burning fossil fuels. That's the fact, and polls consistently show that. Sometimes it determines elections. It did in Canada a couple of elections ago. It didn't in this one, which was about our friends from south of the border, who perhaps, you don't need to apologize. But I must say, it's incredibly existentially unsettling to have a very powerful person suggest your country doesn't have a right to exist. It's really, really concerning for us. In any event, sometimes elections are about climate change, sometimes they're not, but it's always a concern. And that's a fact. And when people don't want to go along with you, keep that fact in your pocket. But one thing that's really important, because some of the voices that don't want to accept climate change are very loud, people believe they're far more numerous than they actually are. And there's research that backs this up. So they call it pluralistic ignorance. I have no idea what that really is. But Kiera, my colleague, who's fantastic, she's got a master's in climate communication. I've tasked her with being the most effective climate communicator in the world. Briefed me on this, and it's a very interesting conundrum, because people who are trying to work on climate change believe the opposition to climate action is much bigger and louder than it really is. Well, certainly loud, but much bigger than it really is. And that causes people sometimes not to act. And if there's one takeaway from my remarks, it should be that People want action. They don't always know what to do. They don't always support every particular action, but they want to see action. And Rotarians are so well placed because of the way you're organized, and you are parts of the community who people trust. People trust you. There's a global network of well-funded actors, particularly on the internet, who are trying to create doubt about the science and delay. They often intervene at political moments on particular policies. There's lots of research on that. Won't get into it. You just need to know that's why it seems sometimes to people that the opposition is much bigger than it actually is, because it's really well funded and it's out there and it knows how to get into the media. So one of our jobs, the organization I work for, US Rotarians who, and by the way, congratulations on all of the work with this action group. I think it's terrific. US Rotarians who care about this issue and others, is to speak up. So in the last Canadian election, which was about our relationship with the United States, there wasn't a mention of climate change. And this is in the context of not just Jasper. There's been quite significant climate disasters in Canada. So I worked with a group of mayors, including the mayor of Jasper, Richard Ireland, who's a fantastic man, to make the case for climate action in the context of our election. And one of the topics in our election was, how do you build a stronger East-West economy in Canada now that we have North-South tensions, that our ally is perhaps a foe? How do we build a stronger country that's more self-reliant on what we do well? And so we called our campaign Elbows Up for Climate Action. And what we said was, you can build a strong East-West economy that's clean. We can be a world leader, not just in oil production. We can be a world leader in clean energy if we have a national electricity grid, which we don't today. We can be a world leader in clean transportation if we have a national network of fast rail and electric buses, which we don't today. And the mayors called for 5 nation-building projects. And this was the only intervention in the election on climate that got any media at all. We had over 740 articles. Why? Because it was local. You know, Jasper's an important place in Canada because everybody knows it. It's a tourist destination, a national park, but it's tiny. 5,000 people live there. It's very local, and the mayor has a very local voice. So there's local media where they still exist that are interested. It's a powerful story nationally. We had the mayor of Princeton, British Columbia. Has anybody here ever heard of Princeton, British Columbia? Yes. Oh, well, excellent. Okay. For those listening online, that was at least 7 people. The mayor's name's Spencer Coyne. He's an Indigenous man. He's very charismatic, very smart. 4 years ago, there was an atmospheric river that flooded Princeton. It has 2 rivers, flooded it very, very quickly. Less than a couple of hours. I'm not sure exactly. I think the flooding started in about 15 minutes. At that moment, Princeton was full of climate refugees from a place up the road called Merritt, which it had to evacuate because of wildfires that were climate related. The atmospheric river is climate related. And so Mayor Coyne had to deal with evacuating not just his small town in less than an hour, but evacuating all the people who'd come there up the road. And all they have is a road. They don't have a train anymore, nothing. And he was literally out in the street directing traffic, literally. And it just speaks to his voice on the national stage became very authentic and very powerful. And the media were interested because he had a story to tell that was real and true. And in a way, that's like the voice of Rotarians, respected, knowledgeable. So as Neelam said, I've written a book called Solved, How the World's Great Cities Are Fixing the Climate Crisis. You think I might know the title by now. But it's a pretty good book. But my intention in this book was I found around the world, people aren't aware of all the climate action that cities are doing. It's meaningful, it's effective, and I'll explain why in just a moment. And people were starting to lose hope. So I wrote the book to tell the stories of what was happening in the great cities of the world. And my thesis is that if we take the best things that are happening somewhere and do them everywhere, we can actually address the climate crisis. At least what we need to do today over the next 5 years, the next 10 years. And so that's what the book's about and why I wrote it. So why do cities matter? Well, first of all, cities occupy very little of the world, but in them is most of the world's economy, most of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, and most of the world's energy is used. And in these calculations, we're including, for example, if a coal-fired power plant's outside the city but generates the electricity for the city, it's included in the greenhouse gas emissions. So cities create over 70% of the energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. So the greenhouse gas emissions are in cities. And increasingly, people are in cities. When I was elected mayor of Toronto in 2003, which was a very great honor indeed, the majority of the world's population lived outside cities. That's no longer true because of the growth in megacities in places like China, India, and increasing urbanization in South America and Africa. So the world today, about 55% of the world's population lives in cities, and that's increasing. So we live in an urban world, and that's where the greenhouse gas emissions are. So if that's where the problem is, that's where the solution should be. So C40, the organization I work for, originally was 40 cities, hence the name. We're now 97. And the idea behind C40 was started 20 years ago. We're actually celebrating our 20th anniversary on Tuesday in London Climate Action Week, a day after the 10th anniversary of the Paris Accord on Monday. It was started by Ken Livingstone, the mayor of London, England, who had a really powerful insight. And his insight was the major cities of the world have the political heft, you know, the bully pulpit, and the civil service skills and competence and the money to both do something about climate change, take action, and to influence the international conversation about climate change. So he created this organization sort of modeled after the G20, but we very quickly realized we didn't just want the capital cities, we wanted the really big cities. So in New York, for example, you wanted Los Angeles, in the United States, you wanted Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago, not just Washington. So it became 40 cities, world's most significant and powerful cities. And from the beginning was about half global north, half global south. Today we have 15 large Chinese cities who are members, for example, and it's nearly 100, about 20% of the world's economy. And it's still an organization that uses the voices of those mayors of the major cities and their actions with a goal of helping the world avoid climate breakdown. And they do that through a variety of things, what we call transformative city actions. It's just a map of the cities, and it shows you actions that are happening somewhere. And predominantly, sorry, do you want to take another photo? Oh, you got it? Okay. So the way this is done is all of these cities have a climate action plan. And what happened was, it's called Deadline 2020. When the Paris Accord was agreed, which by the way, agreed to a 2-degree target, which everybody recognized wasn't good enough, but it was all they could get. And Canada intervened through Catherine McKenna, our then newly elected environment minister, to say we should have a higher ambition of 1.5, but the ambition of the world was 2. The C40 steering committee, it's an elected committee of mayors elected by the members, met. The chair was Eduardo Paes from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and said, what can we do to do our part in Paris? And how do we do it in a science-based way? And it was agreed that by 2020, every C40 city, in order to be a member, there's no dues, no cost, but you have to be committed to and taking climate action. Agreed that every city would have to have a plan to do their fair share of keeping overall average temperature rise to 1.5 degree or less. What that basically meant in the global north was peaking by 2020, halving by 2030, net zero by 2050. In global south, peaking could be later, but still on the same kind of pathway. And today, virtually every single C40 city has such a plan. And the plans have a commonality because generally, within these large cities, the greenhouse gas emissions are in 4 areas: how we generate energy, transportation, how we build and operate our buildings, and how we manage our waste. And they all have programs in those areas. Some have different strengths than others in those areas to do their part of keeping the world on a 1.5 degree trajectory. Really important initiative. And credit to Mayor Paez and his successor as chair, Mayor Anne Hidalgo of Paris for that. This idea of having climate plans that do your fair share of what science says is necessary has spread. One of our funders, Real Dania, it's a philanthropy in Denmark, has used C40's idea to help nearly every single Danish city and town and village have a climate action plan that adheres to the same goals. And of course, being Denmark, they're way ahead of everybody else. But they call it DK 2020. And a couple of years ago in Glasgow, we enabled over 1,000 cities to sign up to something called the Cities Race to Zero, which is connected with the COP process. But the standards of the Cities Race to Zero are the same as C40's. So I'm mentioning all this in some detail to show how the ideas spread. The major cities, the biggest cities that had the political heft and this public service capacity, set a strategy and a plan. And now that idea is spreading to cities large and towns small and tiny across the world. So it's gone from 40 to 100 to all of Denmark and now to 1,000 and more. So how do they do this? Well, different cities have different strengths. And as I said, if you could do them all, something that's happening somewhere, everywhere, you could make major change. But Curitiba is working on both buildings and on energy. It took a former landfill and created a solar plant on the former landfill. Very important, quite unique financing, which is important for cities, particularly in Latin America. So it's a model for that through the World Bank and others. But Curitiba is also very good at building a dense city around a public transit network. And for those, do people here know about Curitiba? Yeah. Okay. Well, it's a fascinating city. There's an emphatic yes in the front row here. So I won't go into it too far, but it's had some great mayors, and a former mayor, Jaime Lerner, is given credit for creating the first bus rapid transit system in the world, because he did. And I heard him speak once. He was so, I was mayor, so it was a bit awkward, but you'll see why in a second, but he was fantastic. Sorry? Brazil, Curitiba, Brazil, sorry. He also pedestrianized the downtown. And somebody said to him at this event in Toronto, how'd you pedestrianize the downtown? You know, it's very controversial in our cities. And he said, oh, well, I did it on a Sunday when the businesses were closed, and we declared a school holiday on the Monday. So when they came back, the street was full of children and they couldn't do anything about it. And so people said, Mayor Miller, why don't you do things like that? And well, because we have the rule of law. Well, it seems to be eroding these days. Anyway, so what else is happening? Buildings. Tokyo has a cap and trade system. It's a city-based cap and trade system. There's always conversations about carbon tax, cap and trade, all these ideas. Economists love them. They're difficult politically. Tokyo introduced the cap and trade system for buildings, and because Japan culturally the way it is, almost everybody complied. So they set a cap on emissions, and if you violated the cap, you could trade. This is for commercial buildings because that's where most of the emissions are. And almost every single building complied because they didn't want to be singled out as failing. It was really, really interesting, an important initiative showing what can be done. Portland, United States is really densifying. So that fights urban sprawl, helps cities grow in lots of other ways. Because you can rely on public transport instead of private cars, reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Many mayors link their climate initiatives with social justice initiatives. So they're doing this in places like Johannesburg around inclusionary zoning, so lower income people have the ability to live in the city. Lots more examples around buildings. And one thing I need to leave with you is that buildings isn't sort of a politically kind of sexy topic, but it's incredibly important. You know, in cities like New York, the single biggest emitter of greenhouse gases is how they heat and cool the buildings there. Same thing in Toronto. In a more spread out city like Calgary, it's probably transportation, but buildings are still really significant. So those initiatives matter. And one of the good things about having far more energy efficient buildings is they're cheaper to operate forever for the life of the building. So there's an economic case to be made that's very simple and clear. Transportation, lots happening on transportation, and it's coming out of China. You know, in the West, there's this idea that China is a climate villain. Well, it's hitting its climate targets. Now, its climate targets, some criticized because they were saying we're going to stop growing our emissions, but they're on track to do that. They made a commitment, they honored it, and you can't say that about a lot of Western countries because they've made commitments and they've failed. And how do they do that? Well, a lot of that is because the government's empowered the cities to move really strongly on clean energy and clean transportation. And they've done that, I think, this is my opinion, it's not scientific research, because the air quality got so bad from the coal-fired plants that it became a political issue. And even in China, when things become a political issue, the government responds. That's my view, and I think the facts support that. Shenzhen has a fully electric bus fleet, as you can see from the slide. That's 16,000 buses. Their taxis are electric. And one of their biggest industries now is the manufacturing of electric vehicles through BYD, Build Your Dreams, which is a Chinese company. It also has plants in places like California. It's one of the world's largest manufacturers. And that was one of the reasons that Shenzhen pursued electric vehicles is an industrial and job strategy. Very shrewd on their part. Jakarta, electric buses as well. But a very important policy, everyone should be able to walk to public transit, and they're at 92%. When I was mayor of Toronto, we had a policy that all day and all night, everybody should be within 15 minutes at worst of operating public transit. So even at 4 a.m, if you're a shift worker, you could have a bus that got you home. And those kind of policies are expanding all over the world. Energy. A lot of cities don't run the energy grid, but they're still taking action on energy. So Rio is purchasing 100% renewable energy, and that matters. There's initiatives like this all over the place. It matters because it changes the local market for energy. If a huge purchaser like a big city decides to purchase renewable energy, somebody has to supply it. And it also reduces reliance on energy from oil and gas and coal, which are all significant problems from a climate perspective. In Seoul, they're providing solar PV to 1 million households. And I love this project because I could imagine this happening through local Rotary groups to one block in a neighborhood. You know, why not? Why can't we take a great idea like that and scale it to be local? And another place to look to is Austin, Texas, where they've had very interesting projects over years. One I think they called the solar power plant, where they were growing so much they needed a new power plant, and they decided instead to subsidize people to put solar on the roofs of their houses. And they had done it before by subsidizing energy efficiency in houses, which was cheaper than building a new plant, and the new plant would have been coal-fired. So they had climate benefits. People liked it, made the housing more efficient for a long time, and they did that with solar as well. Well, you can imagine somehow creating a program like that at a small neighborhood scale through a Rotary initiatives. And then I wanted to touch on waste management very briefly. The key to waste management is capturing the methane emissions from compost. That's the key. Sorry, from garbage, preferably by composting it. But you need to capture the methane because if it escapes straight to the atmosphere, it's a very damaging greenhouse gas. You're better off even burning it from a climate perspective. And some places do this well. Toronto does it very well. Big issue in Africa. And so what Accra did was they regularized waste collection. You used to have a lot of informal waste dumps. They regularized it and helped the informal, the workers who worked in that informal waste picking economy to get proper above the table jobs in the new system. And that new system handled the waste properly, so methane didn't simply escape. And so they created jobs, they addressed poverty, and they addressed waste all at the same time. So what else is happening? Well, some interesting, very interesting initiatives. The basic of having a plan addressing transportation, buildings, waste, and energy is the base. But there's some interesting initiatives building on that. Oslo, which has done incredible things, by the way, has something it calls a climate budget. So Oslo was analyzed. It said, in our climate plan, the amount of emissions that we can emit as a city is going to go down, but here's what it is each year. And, public servants understand the budget process. Politicians hate it, but public servants understand the budget process. It's a really simple thing for them to do. And what Oslo does is say, okay, not only do you need money if you want to build a new curling rink, but you need your allocation of our limit to carbon. So if we can only emit this much this year as a city, you can have your share, but once it's used up, nothing else can happen. The same thing with financial budget. Once it's used up, you can't build your curling rink. So it forces climate-related decisions to be part of the most important decisions in the city government. And that movement is starting to move globally. And I think it applies to almost any institution that's of a size, like it could apply to this institution, Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, of a size to have a budget, can think about what's its impact and how do we include our impact on the planet in our budgetary decisions. And if you do it through the budget process, everybody understands how to do that because they've been doing it for years and decades. So what else can cities do? Well, their voices are powerful, like yours as Rotarians, because they influence change beyond their boundaries. So the world's first green shipping corridor is between Los Angeles and Shanghai. And that came about because the then mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, who was a fabulous man and a wonderful mayor, said, well, we own the port of Los Angeles. What can we do? And cities have no jurisdiction over the high seas. But this is a real program. It's not there yet. It started, but nothing was happening in shipping. And this was the first. And it was because Los Angeles spoke to Shanghai. And there's incredible work going on in trying to get lower emission fuels, zero emission boats, electrify the ports, so on land there's no emissions, and so forth. Really interesting, all because two cities spoke to each other. The divestment movement was going nowhere. Students were protesting universities and so forth. The first time it got traction was when two big financial centers, New York and London, their mayors said, we're divesting our pension funds from fossil fuels. And then you saw traction start to happen in the divestment movement because of the leadership of those cities. It clears the way because they're big and substantial. So other things happening. Milan really working on food security and reducing emissions from food. I saw your plant-rich diet task force. Shout out to it. It's very easy to sign up. I did this morning. but my wife's a full vegetarian, so it's not very hard for me. I've just got to get between being mostly to all the way. But great initiative, really great initiative. Milan is responsible, for example, for school meals. And so the food they provide is now vegetarian, it's healthy, it's actually costs less, it reduces emissions, and the kids are healthier. It's really interesting, stuff happening. And then another initiative I thought I'd mention because it bears on the idea of local, something called Freetown the Tree Town. So Freetown, Sierra Leone has a very charismatic mayor, Yvonne Aki-Sawyer. She's the co-chair of C40 at the moment. They have a particular issue around trees because in the informal settlements near the city, people have no money. And so they cook on wood fires and they cut down the trees. And what happens is there's a loss of cooling from the trees, a loss of absorption of greenhouse gases, and really importantly, there's a lot of landslides because there's slope stabilizers. So they've created a whole program to hire people who live in those communities as sort of urban foresters and tree planters and overseers of the trees once they're planted to make sure they're not cut down, to address heat, to cool the city, to absorb carbon, and most importantly, to stabilize the slope. Now that's at the scale of the city, but you could imagine doing those kinds of projects in a hyper local way as well. So where are things going in my country of Canada? I'm just going to make a couple of points here and then I'll wrap up and ask some questions. In Canada, and I'm mentioning this, A, because I'm Canadian and we're here in Canada, but B, because it's a very good example of Canada as an oil producing country and a significant one. So how do you talk about and act on climate change in an oil producing state or an oil producing country? And it can be tricky. You know, people often don't want to talk about it. So what do you do? Well, one thing you can do is rely on the cities. So Toronto, 2007, we brought in a climate change plan. It had initiatives in buildings, transportation, the largest expansion of rapid transit in the history of Canada, 143 kilometers of light rail, which allowed us to invite development into the city as against sprawl, huge measures on buildings. The provincial government closed a coal-fired plant that supplied Toronto, and the combination of the city's initiatives and the closing of that coal-fired plant means that today, Toronto, which is Canada's biggest city, it's the center of business in Canada and commerce. It's a city of nearly 3 million, an urban region of 7. The emissions of the geographic area of Toronto, that 3 million, are over 30% less than they were in 1990. Thank you. I didn't realize that was an applause line, or I would have said, they're over 30% less than they were in 1990. Rotary! That's what city-based climate action, whoops, damn it, can lead to. Sorry, I'm really not doing very well on the clickers. Okay, so one of the slides I skipped and I can't get back to, I wanted to show because they're important to understand why in the end that mayors are acting on climate. And first of all, it's because the cities are being impacted by climate. Secondly, it's because their residents are demanding action on climate. And by the way, the impacts are huge. When I was mayor of Toronto, we were having storms that were supposed to happen every 50 years, every year. And it meant we had to completely rebuild our storm sewer network, which was going to cost, one part of the program was going to cost $1 billion. At the time, we collected $3 billion in taxes. So as you can understand, having a third of that go to one thing would have a massive impact. So that's one of the reasons that the mayors pay attention. But so those are two reasons. But the third reason is that by doing the right things around climate, you can build a city that is better for everybody who lives there. And Toronto's plan for transit, for example, was built around the urban development plan and around the busiest bus routes. saying that we should take the busiest bus routes and make them into rapid transit routes, some of which has come to fruition, some hasn't, but that's beside the point. And where are the busiest bus routes? Typically to and from the lowest income neighborhoods. So what the rapid transit plan was a means of connecting the lowest income neighborhoods into the fabric of the city and giving people a better chance. And when we were consulting with the public about these routes, one of them was called the Shepherd East LRT. I went out in the bus one morning at 6 in the morning to speak to people. And I had a glossy brochure with me, which was a really dumb thing to do. I recommend do not bring glossy brochures with you when people are commuting to work. But I sat beside this one woman and she said, "Mayor, what are you doing on my bus?" And I said, "I'm here to talk about the Shepherd East LRT." And she said, "What's that?" And I said, "It's a European style tram, sort of like an above ground subway. It'll go along Shepherd, connect into the subway. And because it runs in its own right of way, it doesn't get stuck in rush hour traffic. And it'll get you going where you're going much faster." And she said, "That would be great." And I said, "Where are you going?" She said, "To work." "Where do you work?" "The airport." The airport was 40 kilometers from where we were. So how do you get there? She said, "Well, I take 2 buses, 2 subways, and 2 more buses." So that's a long trip. She said, "Yeah, it's nearly 2 hours. And that's if I don't miss my connections. But in the winter, sometimes with the snow, I do." And I said, "You have a long day." And she said, "That's my morning job. My afternoon, I'm a cleaner at the Royal York Hotel, which is in downtown Toronto, which would be bus, bus, subway, subway, and then subway, subway, bus, bus." Now, that woman couldn't be home for dinner with her family. She couldn't do what my mom did. My mom went back to university and graduated at the age of 56. She couldn't go back to school and upgrade her skills, so she had one job because she was stuck on the bus. And she couldn't even participate in the community meetings. There was a big debate about whether to build this or not, and add her voice and say, "Transit matters for me," because there wasn't any rapid transit. So one of the reasons mayors do these kinds of things is because they're transformative for the residents, and it makes the city a much better place to live. And I think it's a really important point about the best kind of climate actions. They actually make better places to live: cleaner, more efficient, healthier, more interesting, and more able to, people are able to get around in their cities. Final point I wanted to make on the advocacy side, because we are here in an oil producing area, is the latest studies show that natural gas is not cleaner than coal. And the fossil fuel industry has been for quite a long time saying this is a transition fuel, and it isn't. And it's not because it's not cleaner at the point of burning. It is. Where you burn it, it's cleaner, but it's because the transmission process, the pipelines leak. And they leak methane directly to the atmosphere, which from a climate perspective is extremely problematic. So it's almost as dirty as coal. There isn't much in it from a climate perspective. And it's a really important point to know, because you'll have people saying to you, "Shouldn't it use gas as a transition?" And the answer is no. Let's build communities around public transit, walking and cycling. Let's build really efficient buildings. Let's clean our air. And let's use the fact that solar is booming globally to change our energy mix. That's the path to go. And that path builds great villages, it builds great neighborhoods, it builds great towns, and it builds great cities. And I think if we really mobilize, we can build a great world. That's a message I wanted to bring today, and I really appreciate your time and attention. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Karen. Thank you very much. That's very gracious. Thank you.
We do have time maybe for 1 or 2 questions, so yes. We were all worried about the ozone hole. Now that almost disappeared. Any corollary with repairs or drug treatment, sorry, and what action is missing that we need to make this that successful?
So yes, I'm going to repeat it for those not here. The question was the hole in the ozone layer that was dealt with by the Montreal Convention, what's it called? Montreal Protocol, has been successful. And we've seen the ozone layer rebuild. Are there lessons to be drawn on the climate side from that? And I think the answer is yes. Now, the Montreal one was a bit simpler in a way politically, because you could identify the cause and it wasn't a particularly powerful industry, and there were alternatives that were readily available. The challenge with climate change is we're very reliant on oil, gas, and coal globally. It's embedded in the way our economies work. And although clean energy, clean buildings, clean transportation are all far cheaper to run, there's no doubt about that, the cost of transition is real, and there is a cost. That's the first challenge. The second is a political one, because the oil industry, certain elements of it, I shouldn't blame the whole industry, but certain elements of it have fought very hard for a long time to deny the science. And if you read up on this, particularly there's a book from an author in Vancouver about it, the actual communications firms they used to do that were the ones who tried to deny the science of smoking. It was exactly the same playbook. And it creates a real political challenge. So my answer to that is, how do we address that political challenge? First of all, through the community. It's why Rotary really matters. You know, people respect you and trust you and know that you're involved to make good change. Secondly, the kinds of initiatives that I'm talking about in the cities, there are many more. I was just trying to give a flavor. Change communities for the better and make them better places to live. And people can get on to that. You know, at London, England, Mayor Sadiq Khan just fought an election around a toll called the ultra low emission zone to go into central London. It's a big toll. If you have a polluting vehicle, you pay 20 pounds. So it's like $30. And he won. And the whole issue was this ULEZ, and there was all this online stuff, and he won. And why did he win? Because people recognized that he was really trying to clean the air in London, which met the World Health Organization's only minimum standard only 3 times a year. It was horribly dirty, high rates of childhood asthma, high rates of adult onset asthma. And people actually wanted to have air they could breathe. But that's, to me, why the local approach really matters. And it starts with people in community and should go up to their local governments. And most of the initiatives I talked about shouldn't be controversial and make a really big difference. So that's my answer to your question. I think at the national level, it's been tough for a while. It's very tough right now.
Yeah, there's a question here at the back. And before I hand over the mic, David, we were hoping to have your books here for signing. We couldn't get them in time, but everyone, you're free to order them. I think they're on Amazon. Excellent, coverage of all that's happening within cities across the world. What's your question here?
I'm just wondering if I can get a copy of your PowerPoint. I'm sure other people might be interested too.
Yes, please.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
make that available. Yeah.
Well, it's out of my hands, so apparently it's going to be made available. Just one more thing. I just want to thank you all again for the incredible welcome here. The book's available on University of Toronto Press's website. Unfortunately, they couldn't come today, but it contains lots of examples of this. And just to commend you, the one thing I didn't mention at the beginning, my father-in-law was a banker, and he was in the Rotary Club of Bogota, Colombia, and always spoke to me about the amazing things Rotary was doing there. So, I know the strength of the work you do, and I think this particular action group has incredible legs. Keep it up, and best wishes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Brian. David, thank you very much for joining us. Oh, yes, we're getting to that. All right, so, and while she is getting the thank you gift, we also wanted to mention that one small thing, which is paying for the offset of the cost of the carbon offset for your flight out here. A very small thing, but simply a token of the significance of this problem. But I'm not sure how long you're able to stay after with us. Until lunch. Great. So if you have an opportunity during our break, then you may speak with him. So thank you very much. And I mentioned, go ahead.
Given this book when you registered, Michael wrote it in instead of having a carbon footprint and overhead for prevention, he just set his goal to do the talking for him. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. So now we're going to have a panel of distinguished persons here to talk about some other aspects of this. First of all, will be Ingrid Steinhoff, who is a past district governor in Rotary. And she is a Swede, but who happens to live in Spain. And her focus is going to be on personal and club opportunities. That will then be followed by Meredith Burlew, who will be speaking, who is a global grants manager for Rotary in Evanston. And she will be speaking on elements of a sustainable climate global grant, obviously a topic of interest. And finally, we'll have Wally Gardner, who a very important person because he is in a few weeks succeeding me as the chair of the Rotary Action Group for Community Economic Development. Don't have any health issues, please. And he will focus on economic sustainability. Our panel will be moderated by Karen Kendrick-Han. So I would now like to turn it over to Karen.
No, I've got a plan. What happened to the clicker? Oh, new clicker. So if I could invite our three panelists to take a seat towards the front of the room, and we'll hear from Ingrid first. And they each could talk for much longer than they've been allocated. So have your questions ready. Thank you so much. Ingrid, Wally's already up front. Meredith, if you're comfortable sitting at the front table. You guys.
Waiting for my colleagues to come. Yeah, that's nice. So it's to the right. It's to there to change or up. Okay, thank you. Okay, good morning, dear friends, dear fellow Rotarians in the room, and I realized also outside the room, wherever you are. It's an honor to me to speak today with you this morning about a subject that touches us all deeply. And that's why we are here, sustainability. And how we, both as individuals and as Rotary clubs, can be powerful agents for a more sustainable future. In Rotary, we believe in service above self. Today, I invite you to explore how service can include caring for the planet and ensuring that future generations can thrive. Sustainability is no longer just a buzzword, but a critical aspect of assuring the well-being of our planet, future generations. Both individuals and organizations, including each of us as part of Rotary and in our Rotary clubs, play a significant role in driving sustainable practices. Let us take a closer look at actionable opportunities for us as individuals and Rotary Club members to incorporate sustainability in our personal lives, our club lives, and our community projects. But before we explore our possibilities, let's define what is sustainability. Sustainability refers to the practice of meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It encompasses environmental, social, and economic dimensions. Sustainability promotes the responsible use of resources to achieve long-term balance and harmony within ecosystems and communities. Rotary made a commitment to sustainability when we added protecting the environment as our 7th area of focus. Protecting the environment includes all the changes we face, from climate change and deforestation to plastic pollution and biodiversity loss. And the challenges are all interconnected and urgent. We have known this for some time. In 1967, Lady Bird Johnson, First Lady of the United States, observed the environment is where we all meet. It is the one thing we all of us share. We Rotarians, with our global reach and local actions, are uniquely positioned to make a real difference. And this we can do in 2 ways. The first one is to reduce our footprint. With footprint, we refer to the negative impact or the environmental burden that an individual, organization, or community imposes on the planet, primarily through activities that deplete natural resources, generate waste, and contribute to pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. And we can increase our handprint. Handprint refers to the positive impact or contribution that an individual, organization, or community makes to improve environmental and social conditions. Unlike a footprint, which measures harm, a handprint captures actions that restore ecosystems, combat climate change, and promote sustainable practices, thereby leaving a beneficial legacy for future generations. So what are our personal opportunities for sustainability? What can we do as individuals? Remember, small actions, when multiplied by millions, and we are 1.2 millions, create real change. For example, we can call our attention to the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. What does this mean? Reduce, consume less to create less waste. Reuse, find creative ways to repurpose or transform items. Recycle, follow local recycling guidelines to ensure materials like paper, glass, plastic, and aluminum are properly processed. And don't just wish cycle. Learn how your local communities process waste. We can, on individual base, adopt energy efficient practices. And this is as easy, for example, switch to LED lights, install or program thermostats to regulate heating and cooling efficiently. Consider installing solar panels, we heard it before. What about embracing sustainable transportation? Walk, bike, thank you. Walk, bike, or use public transportation whenever possible. On top, it's very healthy. Carpool with colleagues or friends. Choose fuel efficient or electric vehicles when considering a new car. A little anecdote from our SRAC group here, SRAC's Climate Solution Task Force Europe. We have a member who pledged to stop flying for short trips and switch to the train in Italy. Now, a year later, his club is holding hybrid meetings, reducing emissions and increasing accessibility. Support sustainable products and local business. Purchase products with eco-friendly certifications, such as fair trade or organic labels. Support local farmers markets to reduce the carbon footprint associated with transporting goods. Opt for clothing made from sustainable material. And a part of all of this, we as individuals must promote sustainable water use, and I cannot say it often enough, we must reduce waste. But we can do much more. What about enhancing green spaces? Create a home garden using native plants to encourage local biodiversity. support urban gardening initiatives to transform unused areas into productive areas, plant trees in our communities for shade, beauty, improved air quality. So you see, we can do a lot as individual to reduce our footprint and to improve our handprint. Let's talk about what clubs can do to become more sustainable. What are opportunities for our clubs to green our meetings? The first step and basic is to make our operations eco-friendly. Encourage paperless communication and meetings by using digital tools. Host events in environmentally friendly venues. Adopt reusable materials for club activities. Reduce food waste. Encourage carpooling, implement a club-wide zero waste policy. Furthermore, we should at club level do community environmental projects. David mentioned this in the introduction speech. Organize, for example, tree planting drives in local parks and urbans. Organize swap events for closest books and household items. We have to increase our environmental education and advocacy. Oh no, I hear something went wrong. Okay, I think there's missing some slides, but doesn't matter. Organize workshops and seminars which can serve as powerful tools for spreading awareness and equipping community with practical skills. And let's participate in global sustainability projects. Deepening global sustainability projects means we should participate in Rotary Foundation sponsored environmental projects. Additionally, programs addressing climate change could involve supporting reforestation projects, investing in early warning systems for natural disasters, or assisting climate refugees through dedicated funding and infrastructure building efforts. An example, a club in Portugal installed solar panels in a rural school, reducing their energy cost by 80%, and a club in India converted an urban-based site into a community garden. Both projects improved the environment and the community, a bit what we heard also by Mr. Miller now. Sustainability is a shared responsibility that requires thoughtful action at both personal and organization levels. Sustainability is not only about implementing environmental programs, but fostering a mindset for long-term responsibility. By embracing these opportunities, individuals and Rotary clubs can lead by example, fostering a culture of environmental stewardship within their communities and beyond. Leadership is sustainability, isn't about being perfect. None of us is. It's about intentionality. As individuals, club president, committee chairs, or project leaders, we set the tone. Create a sustainable charter in your club or district. Designate a green representative or committee club district. And most important, leading by example builds credibility, momentum, and membership engagement. So where do we begin? Talking toolbox. And Karen already mentioned, it has been distributed to all of you. I can strongly recommend you this book. It's written by a fellow Rotarian. He is from Germany, Michael Koch. And it really is easy to read, and it's a fantastic handbook. Once you have made the commitment to sustainability, the first step is to measure your actual footprint, to know where you are on the path of sustainability and how you can begin. From there, every club can define themselves according to their individual possibilities, which measures they want to take to reduce their footprint and to improve their handprint. And there are many ways, believe me, big and small. Maybe you will set the goal to become a net zero club, or maybe, for example, just a remark, in Spain, we already have 7. Or maybe you will focus on taking on a green action every year. In whatever way works for you, you too can become a climate-friendly club. And then I think the most important, and that's what this slide is about, don't forget to celebrate progress at the end of the year. make sustainability visible, actionable, and joyful. Here we have an image from a Rotaract reforest, Rotaract Velbert in Germany, and a solar project in Zimbabwe. I think Rotary clubs and individuals can inspire broader actions and innovation in tackling global challenges through education, advocacy, project participation. In communities, we can collectively adopt practices that protect the planet. Together, as Rotarian, we can be part of the solution. Very important. It is up on ourselves, starting with ourselves, multiplying through our clubs and resonating around the world. Together, we can turn the vision of a sustainable future into a tangible reality, ensuring a healthier world for generations to come. Together, we can make a significant impact in creating a sustainable future. Thank you for hiring people of action. Thank you.
And now Meredith Berlow from the foundation and the Global Grants. And the wonderful thing today is that Ingrid started you with personal, club, community, and district responsibilities and opportunities. And Meredith will help us jump to the next level. But projects aren't just Global Grants, right?
Okay, here's the clicker. Go forward. Thank you so much. I'm a little bit shorter than our prior speakers, so hopefully you can see me. You're good. It is my pleasure to join you today. My name is Meredith Berlew. I am the Director of Rotary Foundation Programs and Grants, but that means that I represent an entire team of individuals at the Secretariat who are here to assist you as action group members and the clubs and members who are doing our service projects. And Karen just mentioned that our service does expand beyond Global Grants. We know that there are tremendous activities taking place in communities through our clubs that are maybe using fundraisers, that are maybe using district grant funds, that are maybe growing to utilize Global Grant funding. And who knows, one day they may grow to apply for one of our programs of scale. So we're here to support that whole spectrum of activity. Oh, this clicker is a little sensitive. So I know that everyone here knows our areas of focus very well. Could I see a show of hands for those who know our strategic goals for the areas of focus as well? Areas of focus strategies. So there's like 10 or so hands that just went up, and that's great. That's okay. So over the last 3 years, the Rotary Area Focus Managers, our action group members, our cadre members, some of our Global Grant participants have been working on strategies within each of the areas of focus. And I'm not going to dive too deep into those today, but I have highlighted a few of the points on the slide you'll see in front of you. Within all of our areas of focus, we're identifying ways that move towards changing attitudes in behavior, in addition to providing equipment. And so for many, many years, Rotary has leaned into infrastructure and equipment, and that is a wonderful starting point. But we have to make sure that we're combining that with changing attitudes and changing behaviors to get to the outcomes that we want to see. We're also moving towards longer term, sometimes larger scale programming, combined with an increase in measurement and reporting. And I've been really delighted to hear this morning how much emphasis is put on data, is put on science. We really want to make sure that our interventions at the club level, all the way through that large scale foundation funded programming is based on data and measuring change. And so we'll talk about that a little bit as well. And then by focusing in on priority areas within each of our areas of focus, we're able to really harness the power of Rotary and make a more significant impact in those areas. This is defined based on member action that is already happening. Where is Rotary most active? Where are our members already seeing great success? And how can we encourage other members to move in that same direction to amplify that positive change? Member service is always going to start at the club level, and our areas of focus are broad. But if we start to focus in a little bit more and a little bit more, we might be able to drive change even further. So on that note, I'd like to encourage you to mark your calendars for a few additional events throughout the convention. So there are going to be 2 breakout sessions focusing in on either the areas of focus strategies or Rotary's progress towards measuring impact. The first is on Tuesday at 1:30. That one is going to focus specifically on the areas of focus strategies. The next is Tuesday at 3:30. Busy day for service on Tuesday. And that looks at the building blocks of impact. So you can find more details in your convention app, but strongly encourage you to attend if you're able. So action groups focus in here at that Rotary Club, Rotaract Club, Interact Club level. You are supporting our members as they design and implement their programs. You are oftentimes designing and implementing programs yourself. So the foundation and our colleagues on the RI programs team, we're constantly developing tools and resources to help you with that. And I'm going to share a few of those today. And again, I encourage you to talk with us throughout the rest of the convention. My colleagues Bonaventure Fondahan and Nikki Clayton, our area of focus managers in CED and the environment, they will be here later, and we'd love to dialogue with you about what you're doing, what you want to see more of, how we can help. So the graph or the chart on the slide now comes from our Impact Handbook. That's one of those tools that we have developed over the last few years to try and help our members better understand project design, how that leads into implementation and measurement, so that we can use the results of our programming to inform either an expansion, an extension, a correction of that initial program, or share the learnings out for our other members to take that lesson and either learn from what didn't work and make an adjustment, or build on your success and take that intervention to another community. But you'll see it's a circle. And that's because oftentimes our programs, they don't stop when a particular service project ends. If we're talking specifically about global grants, you may spend your global grant money, you may send in your final report, but there's still information out there to be learned, to share back with the community, to share back with Rotary, so that we can further inform our members and do better service moving forwards. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that Impact Handbook, take a look at this graphic, and use this as you're considering your programming. Similarly, we have recently revised the community assessment. This used to say guide, now it's just a document that says conducting community assessments. But this gives some really great information about gathering perspectives. All of our service starts at the community level. So how are we engaging with the community members? How are we making sure that diverse voices are heard, so that we are developing a service program that is going to have sustainability, not just in the sense of positive outcomes, but in the sense of continuing on after we have sent in that final report or after we have moved on to another program. So making sure that this is a holistic and integrated approach is really important to Rotary. Additionally, understanding root causes is really critical, because sometimes if we're addressing a problem, we're not addressing the root of the problem. And so we haven't really gotten to the core of how we can fix that. And so this provides some really good information on that design stage in particular. And I want to highlight that for our programs that impact the environment, And this is not just grants that are classified as environment. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that throughout the week as well. But it's for programs that have outcomes that touch on the environment. I think many of our CED programming will have an environmental component to it. Many of our WASH programs will have an environmental component to them. So making sure that we're looking at current local environmental threats, cultural practices, and the positive and negative environmental changes that may happen as a result of our program. These are really important as we're designing our global grants in particular, but any service project. And then this is a callback to our impact handbook. Something that Rotary, the foundation in particular, is still on a learning journey around is measurement and collecting data that shows the positive change from our programs so that we can share that both with our members and to the broader community. Some of that is helping our members to better understand the importance of starting with baseline data and then measuring change. Some of it is Rotary improving our systems so that we have a better way to collect that information and then share it back out. But our impact handbook has some really great information on going about collecting baseline data, creating a measurement plan that is going to be most effective for your project, and then reporting that information because we have wonderful stories to tell. Rotary is in communities all around the world. We're doing great work. How can we share that, not just from a personal standpoint, but from a community standpoint and with measurement and data that backs us up? So this graphic is one that's been around for a while, but I still think it's critically important to what we do. And it just shows a life cycle, if you will, of getting to sustainability through global grants. And as I mentioned earlier, it all starts with community, making sure that we're working with the individuals who are going to be continuing on with our programs and our projects after we've gone, making sure that there is local ownership, that there has been capacity building and integration into local systems, very important. And then ultimately going all the way down back to measurement. So something to think about, there is funding available for monitoring and evaluation. So use that as you're planning your projects so that you have the ability and the resources that you need to monitor. There are also some really great subcategories within our global grant guidelines. Look to those if you need additional details on a particular project type, and then know that you have an entire group of staff at the headquarters who are here to help should you have any questions. We've heard a lot about solar in the morning session. I know it's a topic of conversation that will continue again throughout the week. Solar plays a really important part in a number of our programming. Again, so I've heard some questions about how grants are categorized. How does a project get defined as a WASH project or a CED project or an environment project? And that has to do with the outcomes. So as you're planning your project and you identify that change you want to see, wherever those outcomes most closely align, that's the category where your program will get put into in our high level reporting. But we know that many of these areas of focus are interrelated. Some of you who have been Rotarians for a while may remember those little green leaves on the areas of focus policy statement. There's a laugh here. Because the environment plays into so many of our areas of focus. And similarly, solar can as well. So if there is an opportunity to integrate a solar powered water pump, if there is a need for solar to assist at a vocational training center where we're ultimately going to be training people to do a particular skill, it's a wonderful way to integrate those, but it does have to be integrated into the overall program because Rotary doesn't want to fund exclusively infrastructure. And we also don't want to fund infrastructure if those systems don't exist to support it long-term. So some things to think about there. And with that, I'll pause and let Wally take over.
There we go. Okay, so this is my ABC speech. I got told 10 minutes. So what's an ABC speech? Always be brief. That's the AB part. And the C is check your zipper. So we've done all that. I'm Wally Gardner. I'm the incoming president of the RAGSED, which is the Rotary Action Group for Community Economic Development. I'm very, very pleased to be here. It's sort of like the universe going in a circular motion here, because our RAG was actually started right here in Calgary at Calgary West by that guy right over there who had a dream and a vision and a passion and said, we're going to go out and we're going to raise $1 million and fight poverty. And everybody said, and all the 53 Rotary clubs we went to peddle our wares, good luck with that. And we said, no, we're going to do it over 10 years. So we started looking around for where was the most poverty in the world. And we said, the closest we can get to real poverty is the country of Haiti. And that's the poorest place that we can get to from here. And in Canada, we're bilingual, believe it or not. Je parle français. There you go. I also speak Spanish, but there you go. And they're French speaking. We're French speaking. Perfect. We'll do it. So we did a very small little global grant project in Haiti, and it was fairly successful. And right in the middle of it, we had an earthquake, which turned out the whole thing, but we recovered and it went along and it was fine. After that, we said, well, that was tough. Where's the next place we should be working? And we said, Honduras. And that resulted in a partnership with Opportunity International Canada and a group in Honduras itself called IDH, Institute for Development in Honduras. And we managed to, through phases, about $100,000 a year. And we're now on about phase 8 or so. And we said, how are we doing with our $1 million key performance indicator? We're way over $2.5 million. So we hit it out of the park. So we're really quite pleased with that. And I'm quite pleased with coming back here. I tell people I drew the short straw to be becoming president, but initially we had in our district, against the wishes of the governor, and I still don't understand why after I beat him up, but anyhow, verbally only, I didn't hit him. We started with the microcredit task force, and we went around and we hit up 53 clubs in our district and here in District 5360, and sort of got them on a knowledge base, at least, of what we're trying to do. And as a result, we're now in a Rotary Action Group, which we announced before we're allowed to be a Rotary Action Group at the Uniendo America Fair in El Salvador. And we said, well, we can't tell you we're going to be one, but we're going to be one. And so that'll help. There you go. That's better. Alrighty. I'll use my teacher voice. There you go. Haven't done that for a while either. So what's then happened is about 4 days later, Rotary did their bureaucratic thing and announced that we're going to have 14 action groups, and we were one of them. So we were off to a good start. So let me see if we can make the clicker work. That's all about me. People can read. We're all in the Bell literacy part. What they can't do is find the buttons on the clicker. There. Perfect. So the slogan we're looking at is creating opportunity by investing in communities. And what does that actually mean? And we have, like every other organization, a mission statement. What is community economic development? And you can read all that stuff too. We're really into fighting poverty. And how do you do that? We have tools to do that. I lent my handy dandy pry bar to my good friend Carl this morning, and he doesn't return tools. What can I say? But we go out and how do we fight poverty? We find jobs for people. We teach them skills. We teach them vocational skills. We teach them entrepreneurial skills. We give them mini MBA courses, if you would. And we empower individuals, particularly women. That's been where we get the most traction. If we give somebody a business loan and they're female, we get about 96% success rate. It's not so high with guys, I'm ashamed to say, but what can you do? So, boom. Our goals. Fight poverty. That's number one. I can tell you all the fancy mission statements in the world, but what do we really do? We fight poverty. We create sustainable jobs and income. If I can change somebody's lifestyle by just one little thing and give them income of just little bits of money, some of our loans are as little as $25. That's small, okay? $10 a day daycare, for example, in Canada. What does that do? It means a lady can go out and get a job, increase the economy of Canada, and Her kids are looked after, the whole bit. In Latin America, for example, what that means is all of a sudden the kids can go to school because the mom can afford the uniform and the kid goes to school. There's more money coming in. The nutrition goes up. The social impact, as Meredith likes to talk about, is huge just from one little global grant. So don't look at what happens, just because the grant is there and you fill out the grant report form and it's all done. So why have an action group? Because there's a problem. In the case of SRAG, the problem is we got to save the planet and do that quickly before there's no other place. We're looking at it from the economic development viewpoint of how do we save the planet, create jobs, fight poverty, and do it in an environmentally friendly way. And we have some examples of that. And our challenge to you this afternoon in our sessions is how are you going to do that? Like come up with your own personal plan. So we'll be talking more about that too. Is this going to work? Nope. Dead. Oh, it did. Aha. We're working. Okay, so here's the deal. 648 million people live in extreme poverty. That's less than $2 a day. It used to be less than $1 a day. And up until COVID, we were winning the fight against poverty. We're sliding back a little bit right now, but we'd actually got it from $1 a day to $2 a day, not through inflation, but from increasing the economic development in the world. And if you look at it, 1 in 10 women live in poverty. Can we fix that? Yes, we can. Bob the Builder, look him up. 211 million unemployed people in the world. And if we can find people jobs, we give them hope. And if you don't have a job or you don't have income, what you're basically looking at is how do I live day to day? Where's my next meal coming from tomorrow? And all of a sudden, you take somebody that has no hope of everything, give them a training program, give them a loan to start a business, give them the business training, give them a peer support group, and put them in a trust group with a whole bunch of their social peers and some business training and mentoring by Rotarians. And the next thing you know, they've got a business. And I see this all the time. You go and meet these people and they say, who are you? You're, oh, I'm Wally from Canada. And they sort of look at you like, pleased to meet you. Go back a year later. Who am I? I'm a businesswoman, and I sell avocados on Sundays and I do this. And, if you ever remember the Helen Reddy song back from way back when, like, I'm woman, hear me roar. That's what happens. Okay. And you better damn well get out of the way. So that's what we're doing. And we're pleased to be doing it. But if you look at it, if we increase people's income, we decrease poverty for starters, but we also have a whole bunch of other things that are spin-offs from that. So we have a vision and objectives. Let me see what this can make this work again. Whoops. Oh, I love this clicker. It's fast. It's going to be a real quick speech. Boom. Back one. There. Vision and objectives. All nice, highfalutin sounding words. What does it come down to? Get people working, increase the economy, solve education problems at the same time, solve the planet problems, do it sustainably. It's not a big list. No, we'll just start at the top and work your way through. It's perfect. But that's what we've been doing. We're really tying our RAG together with the UN right now, with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And the number one there is, guess what? Fight poverty. So we're number one and we're going to stay there till it's done. That's what we're doing. Our priority actions coming up. Everybody's going to have a business plan and action plans, and mine is to get a clicker that works. Boom. There we go. Perfect. It'll go back and forth. I like this. I have one of these. Mine works. So sustainable employment. Can we create employment that would be everlasting? Well, that's pretty tough to do in this job market right now. But if we teach people skill development, and we're doing that right now in our cooperation with the IT Fellowship, shout out to them, in Uganda of all places. So all of a sudden I'm teaching network security over Zoom to people in Uganda and giving them job skills that they can use to get a better job. Okay. To us, it's like community economic development. Give somebody skills, show them how to be an entrepreneur and get them working. So that's what we do. Next one, and we can't talk about this enough. Whoop. I love this clicker. This is great. Oh, that's okay. I'll crunch it on my way out. There you go. Community assessment. This is the most important thing you can do. Too often we hear, oh, our club's got a project in Uganda or Latvia or wherever. Okay, no, you don't. Let's not do that anymore. you're supporting a project that's locally driven by the community, and you've gone there, you've done a proper community initiative assessment, and you talk to the people there. And we still see things where, and we're doing much better at this. Yes, we are. Than we were doing 20 years ago. 20 years ago, in this district, we did a project where, we're going to improve literacy. We're going to get a CCAN, and we're going to fill it up with books, and we're going to send it to West Africa. Great. And everybody in the district signed up, and we'll give you $5,000 for the CCAN, and we'll collect books and all the rest. So all the old National Geographics and Reader's Digests and all the rest of the stuff, and everybody's old chemistry textbooks all went into the CCAN, and we shipped all these books in English to French-speaking West Africa. Really good. And I said, don't do this. And they said, oh, well, but I thought we were in favor of that. No, we're not, So community assessment is key. And that's the one thing. And then we want to look at changing behaviors, long-term investment, which is what we're really into. Sometimes I think we're bankers. And sometimes we are. But the main thing is to listen. You got 2 ears and 1 mouth. Okay. And go out and talk to the community. And here's me sitting in the middle of a stream, talking to a lady doing her laundry, probably interrupting her day with dumb questions, but but you're getting the perspective from somebody in the community, and you can say directly, like, okay, what's your biggest problem here? Well, I don't have a job, or we don't have clean water, or we don't have whatever. So that's what a community assessment does. It's not a project that some guy from Canada or some guy from Wisconsin or some guy from Michigan went there and said, oh, these people don't have shoes, we'll fix that. No, that's not what we're doing. What we want to do is go out in the communities, find out what they're doing, establish a Rotary Community Corps. We can to get people talking, involve local Rotarians, and sometimes that's tough because they don't want to go where the need is. And oftentimes the Rotary club's in the city, and the project and the people that you want to help are up a mountain someplace. And I once said to the mayor in Honduras, he said, do you really have to go there? And I said, yep, that's where we're going. If I have to rent a horse, we're going there. And he said, you'd rent a horse? Yeah, I'd rent a horse. In Alberta, we're cowboys. So there you go. If we had to rent a horse to get there, do it. But the key word here is listen, and listen to the community, find out what their needs actually are. We had a global grant I looked after, and they said, well, what was your community assessment? We went and talked to the principal of school. Okay, good start. Who else did you talk to? Well, that's it. No. Go talk to the moms, the kids, and particularly moms. Moms love to chat about, their kids in school and all the rest and how they're doing and all the rest of it. That's where you get the real action, and the real traction on your community assessment to find out what really is going on and ask them what they think. And I had one lady, we did a survey on behalf of the Rotary Foundation, and they gave me like $200 a day to be in Honduras. Like I could feed a village for a month for that. So I went and bought juice boxes and cookies and said, okay, so after you get this done, give them a Canada flag pin and a juice box and a cookie. And I was there with my juice box and a cookie, and I don't look threatening, with a juice box and a cookie, and I'm just Wally from Canada. There you go. But that's when you're going to find out what the real thing is. One mom said to me, well, nobody ever asks us what happens. And I said, well, that's why I'm here. We want to find out in this survey if we're doing a good job. And if we're not doing a good job, you should tell us and tell us how we can be better. And they went, that's amazing. Nobody's ever asked us that. And I said, well, that's what I'm here for, So that's what we're doing. So let me give you one example of how we're doing this. This is going to work sometime. There. Okay. One little story. 1 minute? Okay, I'll talk real fast. Okay, this is a mixer, commercial mixer, financed with a Rotary grant, community economic development. That mixer developed into a business with business training and planning and all the rest of it to make basically cake design type things like flowers and seventh birthday type things. And this lady, Martha, that you see down the bottom right, now employs, after she graduated from her trust group, she has her own personal loan that she's paying back, and she now employs 7 people. Okay, she supplies the decorations for 5 different bakeries in the city of Tegucigalpa. So, and it all started with a $25 loan from a Rotary project for that mixer. Okay, if we can teach people food sustainability, these guys had no water. We put in a pump, and you say, okay, what's the results of that? When we went there, first of all, the place was gray, dull, the whole bit. We put in water, all of a sudden there's greenery all over the place. They looked and said, what can we grow with the excess water we now have? There's clean clothes. There's no more skin diseases in our kids. Our kids don't get sick every spring. Those are the KPIs that you're looking for, but not what you think you're going to get. Okay. So in a long-term investment in this water pump, these ladies are now international businesswomen. They export loofahs as a plant to Costa Rica and they use them in the spas. And I said, so 2 years ago, you were just, here and now you're international businesswomen. And they said, yes, we are. So there you can go. Okay, you're going to see the next slide a lot, not that one, this one. Okay, and this is my favorite slide. It's how you organize a project. And we'll talk about inputs, we'll talk about outputs, we'll talk about outcomes, and we'll talk about impact. And if you looked at my first slide, I actually spent COVID in the Universidad de Pontificia de Santiago de Chile studying mediación y evaluación. So measurement and evaluation is the key thing. We're looking at data and Karen's giving me the sign. I'm getting there. It's there. So coming down to the end of it, why does RAGSED work with SRAG? So after you save the planet, people need a job. Okay. That's basically what it comes down to. And we want to get them to the point where we can help them with their jobs, do environmentally things that produce income and help save the planet. So that's where we're going. An example is bees. We're funding a project in Colombia right now. Bees are important. I grow hascaps. Look them up. They're really tough. But you need bees to pollinate them. And in Colombia, we've got bees, we've got honey, the whole bit going on. And it's an environmentally project. So we're down to almost networking break. I'm missing one thing, that one. Okay. The fight to end poverty. We hope to enlist you all in that. Help us with community economic development. We're at booth 439. Drop by Monday afternoon. We're having a RAGSED rendezvous because you're in Calgary. Yahoo. Okay. That's me, Wally Gardner, Rotary, Gmail. You'll look us up, ragsed.org. Okay. And drop by our booth, grab a business card that will tell you all about RAGSED rendezvous on Monday. So thank you for your time.
You have been amazing in your tenacity. We do have a 10-minute break, but if you are not back, you will miss hearing from the now in the house president of Rotary International. And we will do panelist questions after Stephanie leaves.
Oh, oh no. Everybody start. Well, they could work quite well.
Yeah, yeah, that's helpful. I can see from there, I think. It's not easy, but I can sort of see it. Yeah. Oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, I'll manage. Yeah, no worries.
Folks, it's time to reconvene, please. If you'd all please take your seats so that we can open the next phase of the program.
Sorry. We have another vector, a little bit stronger. To the right. Right. Yeah. Very good. So it's still back and forward, but just a little there. Very good. A little long, stronger too.
Okay, good. If you could, please take your seats. Yeah. Please take your seats. The food and the coffee are good, but the next speaker is even better.
Ludwig Kalthoff, if
No.
you'll come up.
Yeah. Okay,
Okay, so introduce Stephanie.
sure. Ludwig Kalthoff is from the Rotary Club of Eco Planet, I believe.
Yes,
All right, which is
absolutely.
which is a combination e-club and then also, in a special interest. Hopefully that is better. And Ludwig will introduce our next speaker. So the floor is yours.
Dear friends in Rotary, dear Rotaractors, dear interactors, dear Rotarian family, I'm so proud that I may introduce my personal president, Stephanie Ercik. You know all of her, and her motto is magic. And isn't it magic to have a small pension? The name of this small pension is hope. Hope needs our hands to live healthy on this planet. Our hand has 5 fingers, 5 letters like ocean, like earth, or like solar, and 5 letters like SRAG. And we want to improve with you your handprint, the positive impact of all of you. Impact means energy, food, transportation, waste, and water. Ingrid has showed us. And we as ASRAC look for networking. Networking with all RACs, with all fellowships, facing biodiversity loss and facing climate change. And our handprints are united for good. Let me call for one action. Who has, here in this audience, who has a natural garden? Please stand up. A natural garden. Who has a natural balcony? Please stand up. Great, I love it. So just take 3 pictures, 1 video with 90 seconds, and then send it to me, and we will present it at the Rotary Institute in Brussels, a great institute. So hope will accompany us on the way Rotary International might become net zero in 2040. Thank you so much. Give a big applause to Stephanie Ercik.
Hello, family of Rotary, both here in Calgary and online. I want to begin by thanking the Environmental Sustainability Rotary Action Group and the Rotary Action Group for Community and Economic Development for hosting this incredible and important gathering. You represent the very best of Rotary. Passionate people, grounded in professional expertise, coming together to take action on some of the world's most urgent challenges. I want you to know how deeply Rotary appreciates your leadership, your creativity, and your relentless commitment to service. You're showing the world what it looks like to build more sustainable and equitable communities, locally and globally. As you know, Rotary's newest area of focus, the environment, isn't just a nod to what's trending. It's a response to what the world needs right now. The triple threat of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution is reshaping lives and livelihoods everywhere. And while national governments may struggle or stall, we, as Rotarians and Rotaractors, cannot afford to wait. Rotary is in a unique position. With more than 1.2 million members worldwide, we are a powerhouse of local knowledge and global reach. We raise money efficiently. We bring technical expertise to the table. We build bridges where others see borders. Why this is important is clear to us. Our action plan calls on us to increase our impact, and the environmental crisis gives us an unprecedented opportunity to do just that. Every club, every Rotarian, every Rotaractor can make a difference, whether it's planting trees, switching to renewable energy, or advocating for sustainable practices in all of our communities. And thanks to you, SRAG and RAGSED, we have a roadmap to get there. I'm inspired by the practical, high-impact initiatives you have launched. The Million Solar Panels Challenge is a bold vision, and it has measurable results. Measurement leads us to impact. The Plant-Rich Diet Initiative reminds us that even small personal choices can have planetary consequences. You know, the last boyfriend I had, when he would come over, he'd stand at the sink and, wash his, he'd leave the water running. And I'd say, shut it off, shut it off, shut it off. Small things make a difference. And the Every Club Climate Friendly campaign makes it simple and accessible for clubs to take meaningful climate action. These are Rotary projects with scale, with sustainability, and with purpose. And you collaborate across boundaries. In Rotary, we sometimes organize ourselves by professional focus, but the problems we face in the real world don't respect silos. Climate change affects public health. It affects food systems. It affects housing. It affects jobs. It affects everything. The partnerships between SRAG and RAGSED embodies the kind of cross-cutting and integrated work that we need more of in Rotary. This is also called the horizontal mindset, and it's essential if we're going to remain relevant and remain impactful. This year, our Rotary theme has been the magic of Rotary. And magic to me doesn't mean fantasy or make-believe. It means transformation. It's what happens when we bring people together, align our values with action, and stay focused on the things that matter most. It's the magic you create when a club in Alberta or Argentina or anywhere makes the choice to lead. So let me close by saying Thank you. Thank you for inspiring Rotary to be bolder. Thank you for holding the mirror up to our values. And thank you for reminding us that the future isn't something we predict, it's something we build together. Thank you so much. I am happy to answer any questions that you may have. If you have an outside voice and can jump up and ask it loudly and I can hear it, I can answer it. Here's a question. Yes. Oh, that's even better.
Thank you. My name is Susan Haig. I'm from the Summit New Providence Rotary in New Jersey, and I'm thrilled to be back in Calgary. I worked here 30 years ago with the Calgary Philharmonic.
Great.
And I've been in Toronto, Windsor, other places. My question is about our news media. It's very distracting. I completely agree with you that Rotary has just an amazing, unique potential through its local and global reach. I'm interested in your thoughts on whether there can be a task force on messaging specifically to our professional news media who have a very hard job. We all yell at them, but they have a hard job. And yet these messages here today, microforests, reforestation, replenishing our natural environment is complex and key. So I would love your thoughts
Sure,
on whether there can be a
sure.
Rotary task force on media.
Well, let me address that in a couple ways. For how much time do I have to talk about media? I think the most effective thing that we can do initially is educate our own base. And that means using our Rotary media, our Rotary channels, and we have many of them. We have a website, we have podcasts, we have the Rotary magazine, we have all kinds of ways that we should be educating our own base to understand the importance of the work we do. As far as outside media, that's a tougher nut to crack. I'll give you an example of, when I was nominated, I live in Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. And so the media market is Western PA. So as soon as I was nominated, the Rotary clubs in the Pittsburgh market approached the local media, KDKA television, the CBS affiliate, and the other ones. And they all said the same thing. They said, she didn't start a fire, she didn't rob a bank, and she didn't kill anybody. We're not interested. So media has a warped sense of what sells. But I will tell you that we kept at it. And we kept at it by finding out where the hooks were. So we found a reporter that had an interest in girls and women's empowerment. And that, of course, is something that Rotary is focused on. And so it's because we had a reporter who was interested in it that we were able to get in and talk about that, and then suddenly talk about somebody from the area being in a leadership role. So that would be my advice, to try to find the hooks and the ways that you can get in and do those things. Another thing, there are many organizations that come to your Rotary clubs and they ask to be a speaker, or they ask for money. I said this to my own club. How many times we've given checks and we've done and we've helped local organizations. How many times have we gone there and spoke to them? And we need to do that. We need to make sure that we are the voice. Often people say to me, when is Rotary going to do X, Y, Z? And I turn that question around and ask, who is Rotary? Who is Rotary? That's right, we are. We are Rotary. Rotary International is building. And it has some staff who are very focused on helping with, clubs and support and all of that. But we are Rotary. If we want our membership to grow, if we want to get our message out about the importance of the environment, we are the ones that need to carry those messages forward. By and large, people don't read. Sometimes that's me. I can't read. Everything comes across my desk. But when we have face-to-face interactions, it makes a difference. There are 15,000 of you here this week to celebrate this convention in Calgary. I urge you to get in front of people and tell them what you do in SREG and community and economic development. Tell them, because that's the way we get our message across. That's why we're here. We're meeting with 15,000 of our closest family members. Long answer to your question, but my thoughts. Yeah. Anything else? There's one over here with Ludwig.
Well, Hope wants to know what happened with the crazy idea from last year when there was a breakout session together with Dave Alexander, the ghost governor, and Yashar and Yavuz, with the idea that Rotary International might become net zero in 2040. What can we tell Hope?
I don't know the answer to that, Ludwig. I do know that when there are Rotary events, we do have people who work on sustainability issues at conventions to make sure that we have lowered our footprint, our carbon footprint as much as possible. I know that that happens. I know it happens in our building, the building at One Rotary Center, that there are measures to happen. But in terms of what happened in your breakout and what promises or directions were suggested, I can't help you with that because I wasn't there. Sorry.
Next question.
Here's a
please.
question here.
President Stephanie.
Yeah.
What were a couple of your,
Put it closer.
how about that?
That's it.
President Stephanie, thank you for being here.
Sure.
What were a couple of your highlights, that memorable moments from your year as president?
Oh my God, I don't have enough time to go through all of them. There were so many fabulous things, but I'll focus on a couple that dealt with the environment that were so impressive to me. I was in Slovakia, and one of the Rotary clubs insisted that I go with them up into the Tatra Mountains. And apparently several years ago, a windstorm had come through and absolutely decimated a forest. I mean, just took the whole thing out. Every Rotarian in Slovakia bought seedlings, and Rotarians from across the country went and replanted these seedlings, and it's a young forest now. And there is a marker there. And I was just so proud to be a part of Rotary, standing there in front of this forest that they put in. It was amazing. I can't tell you the number of trees I've planted around the world. I've planted avocados, oak trees, olive trees, all kinds of trees. And that's testament to how important that is for Rotarians to take part in, helping our environment. So those are just a couple that come to mind.
And our next question.
I think I have time for one more question before we have to roll.
Oh,
So-
this is a question from our participant in India who's online today.
Okay.
And she was asking, is Rotary planning any global initiatives to support clubs exploring innovation and tech for good?
Okay, let me be clear
and
that
I-
Rotary will never tell a club what to do. Never. Clubs decide what it is that they want to work on. Districts decide what they want to do, as an entity. Rotary is there to support the work that we do. And through our Rotary Foundation, that's our charity. That's the charity that exists for all of us as Rotarians and Rotaractors to access funds to help us do the work that we do. But Rotary International will never say to a club, this is what you should do. We have 7 areas of focus for a reason, because the needs of the world are vast, right? And we hope that Rotary clubs around the world will look at their community, will look where they are and say, this is something that we can make better, and then choose how to follow through on that action. Thank you for the question. Thank you, everybody, for your warm welcome. Happy to be with you.
Thank you, President Stephanie. And a modest token of our appreciation, we have two gifts for you. One, SRAG will use its flight carbon estimator to offset the carbon of your flight here. And we can't wait to see when our estimator is a part of Rotary's official convention registration page. And because you have emphasized the importance of clubs, the person who wrote this book saved his carbon and is giving you a copy of his book
Well,
instead.
fantastic. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you. Chair.
President Stephanie, thank you very much for being a part of our meeting this morning. So at this point, I would like to call up our panelists again, and we'll continue with that, answering questions from our audience. So Wally and Ingrid and Meredith, if you can come on back up. Not sure. Oh, it's over there. So let's start with a first question from online.
There you go. There. Hello? Yeah. Often there's conflicting information about what is and is not good for the environment. How can clubs choose what to prioritize? For example, local versus plant-based, wood versus synthetic fibers, what tools to or not to use for your projects?
So to repeat the question, it's not always clear what the best thing for the environment is. Do you focus on plant-rich? Do you focus on locally sourced foods? Do you focus on, restate the question louder into the mic, Mr. Hands?
Yeah, how do clubs prioritize when there's conflict as to what's good, a good project or not so good project, like wood versus synthetic fibers, or
I'm going to ask Ingrid to address, what do you do when there's no perfect answer, but two sort of good ones?
Thank you very much. I think basically that's very easy. Each club lives in a community with certain problems. And we all are clubs from different countries, different continents, and our environmental problems will be very different. So a club in Spain has definitively a different environmental problem than a club here in Canada or one in India. Check the community. What is the problem the community has with its environment? Depends if you live at the seaside, at the beachside, in the mountains. So once again, a bit like Stephanie said, the clubs know what the community knows what the club can do.
Meredith, would you like to add anything to that? Okay, Wally's got an idea.
Okay, I would echo that definitely, but I'd also tell you that if you look at what you can do as a Rotarian, you can do this much. In your Rotary Club, you can do a whole bunch more. And if you find another Rotary Club in your district or a different district and say, you and I have the same problems, okay, it's a lot easier to do the global grant if you just have to copy paste between the two of you. Plus you have new allies, plus you have a bigger voice to lobby local government, and more people working on the same problem solves the problem that much faster.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add to that is that it's important to take action. And so you talk with your community, you build your networks within Rotary, and you begin to solve a particular problem that you've identified, and then you measure and you learn. And so what is working, what is not working, and make adjustments along the way. It won't be perfect at the beginning, but we'll continue to adjust and adapt, and we'll get to a positive change.
And I think one of the roles of action groups can be to provide a forum for those conversations to go on so that we can offer task forces that are around the world gathering ideas. I see a question from Ariel Miller, our retired newsletter editor from SRAG. Oh, let me get you the mic.
Just a second. Look.
This question is probably mostly for Meredith. In terms of some of the large other NGOs that Rotary is collaborating with and picking up on the idea of leverage, what are some of the NGOs that you've seen great collaborations with Rotary beyond the Gates Foundation, but others?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Some of you may be familiar with our first program of scale, which was Partners for Malaria-Free Zambia. That was a $2 million Rotary investment that was matched by a $2 million investment from the Gates Foundation, which you referenced, but also with World Vision. And that program had a very defined M&E plan. We saw what was working in Zambia, and we saw how those results translated elsewhere. So that program has grown to be now a $10 million investment from Rotary, a $30 million investment overall in 4 countries in Africa. And in addition to the 3 partners who continue to work on that, we're working with PATH. We are working with ALMA. We are working with a lot of local entities to see that program succeed. But I think one thing that is really important to emphasize here is that while the Rotary Foundation may have some partnerships, we do have strategic partnerships. We have a great strategic partnership with UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program, and we'll be talking about community action for fresh water throughout the convention. And I would encourage you to go to the breakout focusing on that program as well. But a lot of our strongest partnerships happen at the local level. And so they are our partnerships with either NGOs or other interested groups to do work at the club level, the district level, or the regional level. And as long as we are defining roles and responsibilities at the beginning of that joint effort, we can have a lot of success. So it doesn't have to come from the foundation.
I would echo that as well. Doing a lot of echoing here. But when you look at what's possible, even at the local level, without even doing a global grant, you can put together a whole consortium of clubs that work together on a project and find yourself an NGO. RAGSED right now has got a pilot project going in Uganda with World Vision, and we're putting up about $350,000, $400,000 from Rotary money from a whole bunch of different Rotary clubs, from a whole bunch of different districts. They're putting up an equal amount, and we're running an $800,000 project. So that's possible. Okay, and we'll show you how to do that this afternoon. But more importantly, look for people that are doing the same thing you are and make alliances. In Spanish, we call it alianzas. And if they're working on what you're working on, it's much easier, much faster, and more impactful if the 2 of you are doing it together. Rotarians are really good at raising money. We're really good at, we have boots on the ground in a whole bunch of countries. We understand the cultures of a whole bunch of countries, and a lot of NGOs don't. So working together, they have good ideas and technical expertise. We have people, we have money, and we have enthusiasm. So together, we can really do great things.
Our next question.
Thank you. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Oh, man. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Oh, that's much better. This is for Meredith. My name is Musonda Kapatamoyo. I'm a district governor nominee for District 6460 in Southwestern Illinois, and also originally from Zambia. So I'm familiar with the malaria project. But my question was, earlier you said that there's money for monitoring and evaluation. My district is very involved in global grants. And we do the M&E through the channels in the global grant process. But did you mean that we can actually have opportunities to travel and see these projects before closure?
So the funding that you can budget for monitoring and evaluation within the grant should be used for local monitoring and evaluation. And so we wouldn't necessarily fund travel for international partners just to come and see the program. We would expect that that would be covered by the club or the district or the members themselves. But we do want to try and encourage Rotary members to ensure that they're doing that monitoring. And if it's not something that the volunteers feel comfortable doing on their own, know that you can invest with, sometimes it's a local university, sometimes it's another monitoring agency locally to help with that effort. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and up to this point, measurement and evaluation, which is one of my pet interests, has been something that got done at the end of the grant, like, oh my God, we've got to fill in this form. And what are we going to tell them? And we don't have any data. It should be built into your grant management to start with. And it's important. Like, we know we do good in the world, but how do we do good better? And that's what getting data will get for you. How to get your project and fine tune it. And you'll find really surprising things that you didn't know before. I went to Honduras to evaluate a vocational training program in welding, and it was all in schools. So I went, well, the schools, I said, you guys are teachers, you do evaluations all the time. What's a KPI or a key performance indicator that this project is producing an impact in the community? And he looked me right in the eye and he said, we have less teenage girls getting pregnant. And I went, what? I would never have put that in anything, but he showed me how it worked. He said, there's jobs available. All these girls taking the welding program know that they can make real money working at the shipyard, and that's what they're doing. They don't have time for boyfriends. They're learning how to weld, and I'm going to get a good job and I'm going to make money. That's the motivation, but it's not a KPI I would have looked at. But having that kind of data, and there's new tools that we can tell you about that you can go out, send people out to ask questions, do surveys. We can tell you how to construct good surveys that don't say things like, do you want a Ferrari? Everybody goes, yeah, I want a Ferrari. Yeah, I don't. The service fees are ridiculous and the oil changes cost you $1 million. But if you ask somebody that's an open-ended question. Find out exactly what the community is looking for and see how Rotary can work together with the community to fill that need.
Our next question.
So may I interrupt for a moment?
Yes, go ahead.
Moderator would like to ask a question. Meredith, would you talk to us about the difference between outputs and outcomes and what we can do about counting each? Because if we don't have those numbers, we'll never get to measuring our impact.
I would be delighted to. So I will call back to a couple of things from earlier in the panel. One was my reference to the building blocks of impact breakout session. That session is going to go very deep into what Karen just referenced.
And sadly, it's at the exact same time that our sustainable communities, the only breakout SRAG got.
Well, then we'll have to plan for a Zoom.
A redo.
But you did see the slide that Wally had, which showed inputs, outputs, outcomes, and impact. And your monitoring journey is going to take you through all of those. Rotary knows our inputs. We know how much money we're investing in a project. We know the time Rotary members are investing. Oftentimes, we're quantifying our outputs. How many trees did we plant? How many computers did we provide? How many wells did we install? What we might not be measuring are the outcomes. So you purchased 100 computers for schools. That's your output. But what was the improved learning outcome? How did the literacy rates improve? How did the test scores for math and science improve? How did the teacher training evolve? Those are all outcomes of that original output. In the environmental space, maybe we've done a reforestation project and we know that we've planted 100 trees, but what is the outcome of that? What was the increased or decreased carbon, et cetera, et cetera. So it's going to that next layer that's really important, because that's what eventually gets us to impact. And you heard Stephanie reference Rotary's goal of increasing our impact. You can't get to impact if you don't know your outcomes. You can't get your outcomes if you don't know your outputs. And we're still sometimes struggling to get Rotary members to actually share back that output level data with us. So one thing that we can do is improve our collection system. And so both within Global Grants and the Service Project Center, where our non-funded programs are reported back, we're going to be including standard indicators for the areas of focus. And so this is going to allow us to measure across project types what those outputs and outcomes are, and then roll that up into area of focus totality measures, and really help us to tell our story. And then we get the PR folks who are going to help us to push that out to all of the newspapers and build upon that. But it is about both telling Rotary's story and then also helping our members learn from each other. And I think you've heard that several times through this morning. If we know what we've done well or where we can improve, we can share that throughout our action group networks, throughout our club networks, and then improve our service moving forward. And I'd invite Wally to build.
Sure. Yeah, you'll hear words like quantitative. What does that really mean? It's a number. If you can put a number on it, that's going to be like an outcome or an output rather. Okay. Even I get it confused. There you go. It's an output. There you go. So if you think of a well, you're looking at gallons per minute of water coming out of it. It's an output coming out of a pump. Think of that as a mental image to get it straight. And that is got stuff coming up to it before that are inputs. You need drilling equipment, you need people with expertise, technical skills, hydrological engineers to measure the aquifer below the surface. But that all leads up to the output, and that's water coming out. Now, what's the outcome of that? And you think, oh, well, in lots of cases, that's got down to the point where we've eliminated stomach disease in children. So now they're in school instead of being sick at home. We've eliminated a whole bunch of skin diseases because people are washing their clothes in clean water rather than stuff that's polluted in the river. That cuts down a whole bunch of stuff. And again, they're in school more. It binds the community together because now we have a water committee that's working together that says, well, we can solve the problem of water. Let's work on education. Let's work on this thing.
Wally,
And
would
there we
it be an outcome that women and girls have more time to spend on school or earning enterprises rather than hauling water? Is that an outcome we'd want to measure?
That would be an outcome, but then you also then look at what's the impact of that, because now what are they going to do with their spare time? And what tends to happen is they start to develop businesses, and that's where we come in to teach people sustainable farming, to teach people about things that they can bring more income into their families and into their communities. In lots of cases, when we do that, you'll have some village that's fairly isolated and people have moved to the big city looking for work, and they're now moving back because we put water in and there's a future there, there's a hope, and they can actually have a better life there than they can have in the city.
Okay. So Carl's got a question from the audience, and then I'm going to have Ingrid keep the mic and talk about the local measurement of outputs and outcomes in your own club. But first, Carl from
Yes,
the audience.
our next question is from Bob Spence.
Hello, Bob Spence. I'm a RAGSED member, and for the last 3 years, I've been the International Service Chair in my district. So one of the main issues that has come up consistently is trying to define the sustainability issue in our local grants. It's literally driven us crazy. And so I'm really trying to figure out some maybe broad guidelines to help people out, because partially you address this in your comments you just made, but it sounds like it's a lot more projections, and projections are very hard to prove. So how is this playing itself out for Meredith?
It's a great question. And I think it's less about projection and more about planning and planning so that we're establishing the systems or integrating with the systems that we need in order to make sure that the outcomes of our project can continue once Rotary has spent all of its money. And so, using that water example that Wally was just talking about, if we know we're investing in a well, and that there's going to be a local water council, does that water council have a financial sustainability plan? Do they have access to the community build manufacturers or businesses that they need in order to repair and maintain that water well? Is there someone is there a system where it clearly defines who is responsible for X maintenance, X monitoring, X financial management? So it's about that planning stage, and both the conducting community assessments guide and the handbook for impact are going to provide a little bit more information on that. And we're also happy to talk with you about any project specific questions that you might have. Action groups are great resources. Cadre is a great resource. So there's a lot of support as you're juggling with that question. Would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll say again too that using your example of a water system that we put in, all of a sudden you have all kinds of things that you think are going to happen. People have clean water, but then look beyond that, say, and ask the community. Say, okay, now that you have clean water, what are you going to do with it? How's that going to affect you? Okay. In sustainability, we've been really good up to this point in doing a train the trainers module. Or, we put that together and say, in our grant, we're going to have a part here, and one of our modules that we're going to have in our training program is train the trainers on how to train other people. And we said, that's our sustainability. Okay. There's a guy named Mauricio Miller that has written a book called The Alternative. Have a look at that one. And he's saying, we're doing it all wrong. And I'm going, well, okay. What we should be looking at is sustainability at the person level in the community rather than the trainer level. Like what we're doing is we're ensuring sustainability amongst the trainer people, that industry, if you would call it that, and the helper group. But are we really, really getting to the sustainability of the person down at the where the rubber hits the road that's actually starting a business or working in a field or that kind of thing? How do you make that sustainable? And that's a bigger question and a harder question. So it involves a lot of thought. You need to talk to a lot of people about it. We have cadre members around all over the place, put a plug in for that. I'm the North American cadre coordinator. I drew the short straw again. And what we're looking at there is how to get cadre thinking about that. But we've got a whole bunch of people that have expertise in helping you pry money out of the Rotary Foundation. And part of that is the sustainability. A lot of it's involved with measurement and evaluation of your project. And most importantly is your community survey. Are we putting something into a community that was thought up by a guy in Canada, or is it coming from the community itself?
And now I think we're going to have a question from online, and then we're going to have Ingrid, and then we're going to have Huxmiller.
Yeah, this question is about, I think there's a conflict between doing a community assessment where you're asking folks what they want and asking for behavioral change in a project. Nobody is going to say they want to change their behavior. How do you navigate that conflict, Meredith?
Well, I'll go ahead. Sure. Okay. So back to my Ferrari example. Everybody wants a Ferrari, right? No. No, actually, nobody does. Nor a Tesla for that matter. But there you go. We'll talk cars later. So it's a tough question. And when you're looking at involving a community, it's very hard to ask a question that doesn't elicit a response that says, this is what the guy wants to hear. Okay. Tell him this, he'll go away, that kind of thing. So it involves networking, making friends with the community, talking to people in the community, and not talking to just the leaders in the community. Go talk to the actual people that are the beneficiaries of the project that you're trying to do. okay, and find out what their opinion is too. Rotary Community Cores are a good way to do that. And you can facilitate a group discussion as one method of doing a community assessment and get the community to say, okay, what's our most pressing problem here? You know, what can we do about it? And your part is like, okay, now I understand the problem. How can Rotary help you? And get more input from that. And then together sit down and design a program that will work in that community. But then also at the same time, when you're looking at how you're going to manage the whole thing, look and say, okay, what are our outcomes of this thing going to be? You know, what do we expect to gain from doing this? And how will we know when we're there? You know, and who will look after making sure that we're going to continue to do this? So it's a very complex project that needs a lot of thought. And up to this point, 20 years ago, we weren't very good at it at all. And now we're getting to be very good at it. I'm very pleased to say that.
Yeah, I would echo all of that. And I think as you're having those discussions and you're trying to get at the root of what problems exist in the community, what change do they want to see, then sometimes that also ties into human change. But if you're hearing from the community members that our biggest problem is access to clean water, we don't have that, well, then you know that you're going to address access to clean water and you go about the how. And does that how require a behavior change? And if so, what is that? And then how do you collectively come up with a plan to achieve that desired change? So we haven't talked a ton about a theory of change, but really it's just an action plan. It's identifying first that change that you want to see and then figuring out how you need to go about getting there, identifying some assumptions, and then testing that out. So it's a process. It's all a process.
And now, Ingrid, this is your chance to address theory of change in your club and district and how you measure your
So
outputs.
I would like to say we talk a lot of projects and mine is by far more local for local because my project is how to get us Rotarians sustainable. And we started in year 22-23. We created an environmental committee on district level. And we planted, and let's say I was governor at that time, and it was used, normally you gave a present as a governor, a bottle, I don't know, a statue to all the clubs which you visited. And I decided to be more sustainable, and I gave each member a tree. So I planted 1,600 trees. We are only 1,400, but I thought a bit of reserve could be good to have. And so like this, it started. And out of this committee now we have, this was growing, this was getting very impacting. There was outcome was that, for example, clubs have now a committee, 70% of the clubs have an environmental chair. We have now 10 clubs which are zero net. And now the last thing is what I managed, that District 2203 and 1, which is then entire Spain, we will have environmental committees. So when we talk in SRAC or we talk SRAC Europe, we can talk Spain and not anymore District 2202, which is, I think it's very, very important. And what we do, the next step is to do on in our task force, solution task force, SRAC Climate Solution Task Force, in our African European lead, we are now working on a plan how exactly what we did in Spain, how to make this in the other districts. Start with the governance already when they get elected, get them prepared that they have their chair, and then give them the tools, as we said before, the toolkit, how to do it, and all the presentations, we give them the presentations, and then to convert the clubs in net zero.
And before the question goes to Hux, what did you mean by zero net?
Yeah, zero net is that really, according to the book, we calculate what we do, and then either we avoid or we compensate.
Okay.
So that's like this. For example, we do card sharing with the foods in the clubs. We started not anymore to have menus. You can choose between 3. So there's something for everybody in order that the people don't leave the food. We do, all the meetings are real and online. these kind of things. And then, yeah, then we.
So just to make your day, my club, the Rotary Club of High River, has their own forest. We own a forest. So if you look on Google, Google High River and Rotary and forest, you'll see where our forest is. So there's a practical example.
We planted a peace ball.
We planted poplars.
If you stand up, Carl can see you and bring you the mic. We'll hand you that one. Okay, great.
Thank you. Well, this has all been very inspiring. There's actually a wonderful experiment of nature going on right now in terms of sustainability, because of course, USAID has tried to be sustainable. And then all of a sudden, USAID no longer exists. So it'll be very interesting to watch if their programs are really sustainable.
Is that that sounds like a comment, not a question? And do we have another question from the audience?
Yes, other question.
Hi, this is aimed at Meredith mainly. My name is Bruce Gow from the UK. In your presentation, you talked about long term. And my question, and it sort of follows on to the thing about outputs and outcomes and impact. So what do you actually mean by long term? Because to get to the outputs is relatively short, outcomes is slightly longer, and impact, I would say, is even longer, with the best example being polio as the impact of trying to do. So what's long term?
Yeah, so you're making a great point, and polio is a tremendous example of Rotary's work, which started off smaller, grew to be our corporate signature program, and now does have a very measurable impact in global health. Our grants are not set up right now to measure our impact, and we're moving in that direction. So going back to the program of scale that I referenced, Partners for a Malaria-Free Zambia was set up as a 3 to 5 year program. Once that grant concluded, they are still reporting back to us annually for another 5-year period. And that's how we're going to determine both the outcomes and begin to measure the impact. And how Rotary adjusts its systems so that we can do that for all of our global grants is how we're going to try to measure our portfolio level outcomes and impact. So it is a shift from our global grants strategy right now, where our implementation period is closer to 1 to 3 years. It's very heavy on equipment distribution, and then Rotarians submit a report and move on to a different project or program. What we're trying to encourage is that any type of equipment project, distribution project, has that behavior change component attached to it, that we have identified outputs and outcomes that we're going to measure, and a timeline connected to that. So developing monitoring and evaluation plans is something that we're going to be working on for the next few years, that we're going to be looking to you to help us share that message with our members, and really kind of have a mindset shift from, sometimes in Rotary, there is a my project, my year mentality. And now is that very surprising to you, Bill? But we want to move away from that, and we want to say, what can Rotary do? And what change are you trying to see? How are you going to get there? How are you going to measure it? And then once you think you've gotten there, how are you going to continue to measure it so that you can ensure that the positive benefits continue?
And with that, Meredith, you get the last word because I'm watching the time. And I want to thank Meredith and Wally. Perhaps no one's imposed a copy of Michael's book on you yet. But I want to thank you,
so
Wally.
Much. That's great.
And Meredith, thank you. And again, SRAG will be using its online flight carbon estimator to make a SRAG will be using the online flight carbon estimator on its webpage to calculate and make a grant to the Rotary Foundation to offset the carbon you invested in coming to convention. Wally, you don't get much of an offset
I have a
because
hybrid. You're good.
he didn't travel as far. But so thank you very much. Let's hear it for our panel. And I think Carl's going to take us into the next speaker.
Yeah.
Is that true? Yeah, we can take down the chairs. As good Rotarians, they're going to break down the set as they leave. Okay.
Yes, thank you again to our panel. So at this time, I would like to introduce Dawn Byford. Introduce Dawn Byford from the Rotary Club of Canmore, which is, I guess, just down the road from here, to introduce our next speaker. Dawn?
Good morning, almost afternoon, fellow Rotarians and friends, and welcome to Calgary 2025. This is so exciting. Just feels such an honor to have you all here. It's a true privilege to introduce someone that I deeply admire, not only for her unparalleled expertise, but for the heart, humility, and humanity she brings along with it. Brenda Davis, registered dietitian, is recognized globally as one of the most influential leaders in plant-based nutrition. She has shaped this movement from the ground up, not through trends or fads, but through rigorous science, deep compassion, and decades of real-world impact. She has spoken at conferences in over 20 countries across 5 continents, earning top accolades for her ability to translate complex nutritional science into practical, empowering guidance. Her 13 best-selling books have sold over 1 million copies worldwide and are considered gold standards by health professionals around the world. And Brenda's work isn't just theoretical, it's transformational. She served as a lead dietitian in the landmark diabetes reversal project in the Marshall Islands and again in Lithuania, with results published in leading medical journals. These are projects that heal lives, restore dignity, and offer real hope for communities facing health and food systems challenges. But what makes Brenda especially powerful in a Rotary context is how closely her work aligns with our values. She is all about service, serving people, public health, and the planet. Her family has deep connections to Rotary, and she embodies the 4-way test in action. So please join me in welcoming a true change maker, an educator, advocate, and one of the kindest Calgarians you'll meet, Brenda Davis.
Thank you so much. That was probably one of the most beautiful introductions I've ever had. I'm very touched. Thank you, Dawn. And I can't tell you how honored I am to be here. I'm just beyond impressed with what the Rotary Club is doing around the world to make a real difference, and to be a part of this today is just a privilege beyond words. So thank you so much for inviting me. So with that, there's my little clicker. I will get started. And it is actually Brenda Davis, and it was supposed to be helping heal the planet one bite at a time, not one bud at a time. But butts are good too. Butts are good too. So my presentation is called Unleashing the Power of Plant-Based Diets, Empowering People, Protecting the Planet. And we are going to begin by talking about what a plant-based diet is. We'll move on to talking about why people might choose to eat a plant-based diet, and then who actually advocates for plant-based diets. And then the bulk of the presentation will actually be a practical piece, 7 steps really to designing an optimal plant-based diet, for disease risk reduction and treatment as well. So let's begin with what is a plant-based diet? Well, it's essentially a dietary pattern that is either predominantly or entirely plant foods. And examples include vegetarian diets like vegan diets, or which are 100% plant-based, or lacto-ovo vegetarian diets, which exclude animal flesh like meat, poultry, fish, but include dairy and eggs. It also includes pescatarian diets, which are essentially vegetarian plus fish. And it includes semi-vegetarian or flexitarian diets like Mediterranean diets. So why do people choose plant-based diets? Well, there are really three main reasons. The first being health, the second being environmental sustainability, and the third being ethics. And we'll take a very brief look at each of these. Where health is concerned, some people choose plant-based diets to help them prevent or even treat chronic diseases. Plant-based diets are actually associated with a lower risk of many cardiometabolic diseases, including overweight and obesity, heart disease, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, and of course, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or metabolic associated fatty liver disease. And it is also associated with reduced risk of other diseases and disorders as well, such as gout and cataracts and digestive disturbances. In terms of environmental sustainability, some people choose plant-based diets in an effort to reduce their carbon footprint. And there was a study that came out in 2023 that I thought was quite interesting. And basically it looked at popular diets or the carbon footprint of popular diets. And what it showed is as you go more towards entirely plant-based diets, your carbon footprint shrinks. And so compared to, for example, a keto diet, the carbon footprint of a plant-based diet is a keto diet is 4.2 times greater carbon footprint than a vegan diet. It's 3.8 times greater for a paleo diet, and I think it was 3.2 times greater for an omnivorous diet than an entirely plant-based diet. There was also a trial or it wasn't a trial, it was a review, systematic review of 18 studies in 2020 that showed, compared to current food consumption patterns, we would actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 23% if everyone, or 25%, sorry, if everyone adopted a sort of carbon-friendly diet, so less animal products, more plant foods. But we would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 70% if everyone consumed 100% plant-based diet. And the greatest benefits for both the environment and for health were associated with vegan diets. And then the other reason why many people choose to be plant-based is it's just a way to align their values of compassion and reverence for life with their daily choices. And of course, choosing more plant-based foods can help reduce pain, suffering, and death and in animals, and of course, reduce the demand for intensive farming practices. So who actually advocates for plant-based diets? Well, actually, a lot of you do. A lot of global, international, and national health authorities do. And so the World Health Organization Europe in 2021 put out a document called Plant-Based Diets and Their Impact on Health, Sustainability, and the Environment. And in that paper, they stated that the beneficial effects of plant-based diets, including the protection they offer against premature mortality, provides strong evidence for public health guidelines and recommend healthful plant-based diets as a means of reducing and preventing NCDs, or non-communicable disease, or chronic diseases. And in their 12 steps to healthy eating, the World Health Organization Europe, step 1 is to eat a nutritious diet based on a variety of foods originating mainly from plants rather than animals. National governments are also on board. So Brazil, Canada, China, Denmark, Estonia, Germany, Netherlands, Qatar, Taiwan, the UK, and just to mention a few that are all recommending in their national recommendations that we focus on diets that are richer in plant foods, or that we cut our intake of meat. And chronic disease authorities are also on board. For example, the American Cancer Society says to eat a healthy diet with an emphasis on plant foods. The American Heart Association says the benefits of plant-based diets are clear: less risk of disease and improved health and well-being. And the American Diabetes Association says a plant-forward way of eating is associated with improved health outcomes and a decreased risk for a variety of chronic diseases. And then if you're familiar with the Eat Lancet Commission report in 2019, and this brought together 37 leading scientists from 16 countries, and they were charged with the task of developing a global reference diet that aligns human health with planetary sustainability. And their recommendation was a plant predominant diet, at least 85% of calories coming from plant foods. And they were talking about whole plant foods like legumes and vegetables and fruits and whole grains and so forth, and low in red and processed meat, added sugars, and refined grains. And they also stated that if adopted globally, this eating pattern could prevent 11 million premature deaths annually. So just incredible. And I think all of this is beautifully summarized in this paper called "Can We Say What Diet is Best for Health?" And Dr. David Katz, who's one of the leading authorities on nutrition globally, he's the author of over 400 scientific papers. It summarized it in one sentence. He said, "A diet of minimally processed foods, close to nature, and predominantly plants is decisively associated with health promotion and disease prevention." And this man is possibly one of the best speakers I've ever heard. And he's a very dear friend as well. But his research has been really groundbreaking. And to me, the acid test is really to look at the longest lived, healthiest populations in the world, the places on the planet where there are more centenarians than anywhere else. And these places are called the blue zones. And actually, I should go back there. The two individuals in this picture are both centenarians from Okinawa. Now, what really matters in these areas are people aren't just living a long time. They're actually productive at 100 years of age. Look at them. It's really quite amazing. We have a lot to learn. So the 5 blue zones are Okinawa, Icaria, Greece, Sardinia, Italy, the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, and Loma Linda, California, which is where the Adventists are. And this is a Venn diagram of 3 of the blue zones, Sardinia, Loma Linda, and Okinawa. And what this Venn diagram is illustrating is that every blue zone has some practices that are somewhat unique to them. There are, some practices, lifestyle practices that are common to 2 or more blue zones, but there are 6 practices that are common to every single blue zone we know of. And that is that they tend to be very focused on family. They have strong families. They tend not to smoke. They're very socially engaged. They do constant moderate physical activity. They're always moving. And where diet is concerned, there are 2 things. Number 1, they all consume plant-based diets. And number two, they all include legumes as dietary staples. But we have to admit that not all plant-based diets are healthful. So there were some researchers from Harvard that developed this index called the Plant-Based Diet Index to distinguish the health effects of healthy plant-based diets versus unhealthy plant-based diets. And so the main index is called the PDI, which gives points for a high intake of plant foods and subtracts points for animal products. The HPDI is the healthy plant-based diet index, and that is a diet that is, mainly whole plant foods. And then there's something called the UPDI, or the unhealthy plant-based diet index. And this is a diet that's largely ultra-processed foods, or UPFs. So there are many UPF plant-based foods, as you probably are well aware. So this you might have a little hard time seeing, but basically there have been many studies that have looked at these indexes and looked at the risk of both mortality and chronic diseases like heart disease and type 2 diabetes and stroke and colorectal cancer and so forth. And what we see in terms of the PDI is that in every single case, at the highest quartile or quintile of PDI, we see a risk reduction. So we see, a 24% risk reduction for all-cause mortality. For coronary heart disease, it's 8%. For obesity, it's 44% reduction. For HPDI, we see the exact same thing, except the numbers are bigger. So we see an even greater reduction in risk when people are eating a healthy whole food plant-based diet. And so, for example, instead of a 44% reduction for obesity, it's a 62% reduction. So we just see greater numbers. For UPDI, we see the exact opposite. Risk of mortality increases 30%. Risk of obesity, what is it? Like 94%, I think, increased risk. So this is really important to recognize. So yes, if you consume a plant-based diet, your impact on the environment will be lessened. You'll have a smaller carbon footprint. Ethically, it's a really good choice. But in terms of personal health, you're not doing yourself any favors by eating an ultra processed plant food diet. You want to be focusing more on whole plant foods, and those foods will also have the lowest carbon footprint. So that's important. And, basically the bottom line here is diet quality matters. And so why are healthy, whole food, plant-based diets protective? Well, these patterns are protective because they maximize the components in the diet that have been associated with disease risk reduction, like fiber and phytochemicals and antioxidants and prebiotics and all of these kinds of things. And they minimize components in the diet that are associated with increased risk, like saturated fat and trans fatty acids and refined carbohydrates and new 5GC and TMAO and its precursors and chemical contaminants and pro-oxidants and endotoxins. And these components are concentrated mainly in ultra-processed foods and in animal products. Plant-based diets also provide a safe and powerful treatment option, often driving disease into remission. And we have multiple studies on that. In fact, I just was part of publishing a study in 2025 showing a 23% type 2 diabetes remission in the population in the Marshall Islands that I was working with. And so we've got lots of studies showing this, but I'm not going to go over the studies with you. I just want to share a story. And this is the story of a man named Carlos. And the story begins with his son, Andreas. And Andreas, and this is probably about 12 or 13 years ago, was diagnosed with cancer. And he came to a conference where I was speaking. And after my lecture, he asked me if I could help him. because he had been diagnosed with cancer. And he wanted to give himself the very best chance of surviving that cancer. And of course, I told him with cancer, there are no guarantees, but I'll tell you what we can do. We can stop pouring fuel on the fire. And we can create a diet that is the best possible diet that you can consume. And fortunately, within probably 8 months, he was in complete remission. But the real story is about his dad, Carlos, because what happened is his entire family said, Andreas, whatever diet you're going on, his wife, his mom, his dad, his brother's family, they said, we're doing that diet with you. And his father had been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in 1993. He had had a major heart attack the year before Andreas was diagnosed. He had hypertension, he had high cholesterol, he had peripheral artery disease, he had early stage renal failure, and he had chronic gout probably 6 or 7 times a year. So he was in rough shape, and he was basically told that he had progressive irreversible diseases and he needed to get his affairs in order because he probably had about 2 years to live. And he was being treated on 17 pills a day and 35 to 40 units of insulin. After less than 1 year on a whole food plant-based diet, Carlos was taking 0 insulin and 0 pills. And I you know, the health changes are unbelievable. So his fasting glucose completely normalized. His A1C went down to 5.1, his blood pressure 115/70. He couldn't get it to that even on 2 medications. His arteries opened up, and I'll show you exactly what that looked like. His peripheral artery disease disappeared, his kidney function normalized, and he didn't have 1 single further recurrence of gout. And he went to his doctor and said, why didn't you tell me this was possible? And his doctor said, I didn't tell you it was possible because I didn't know it was possible. He said, I wouldn't have believed it if I didn't see it with my own 2 eyes. And here are his coronary artery disease reports from 2005 and then 2017. And you can see he had really severe coronary artery disease. He had an inferior wall infarct with ischemia. He had inferior wall hypokinesis, a reduced ejection fraction. And here in 2017, no evidence of abnormal cardiac activity, no evidence of ischemia, normal chamber size, normal ejection fraction. And you know, the bottom line is this is what is possible. I know not everyone is willing to make the kinds of dramatic lifestyle changes that Carlos made, but I believe strongly that everyone has a right to know that lifestyle changes are a safe and highly effective treatment option. And the bottom line is we know enough. We know enough to make healthy choices and lifestyle changes the first line of therapy for lifestyle-induced chronic diseases. And here's where we get to the 7 steps to an optimal plant-based diet. So how do we do this? How do we get these kinds of results? Step number 1 is to make whole plant foods the foundation of the diet. This is not a diet of deprivation or you know, it's really a diet of beautiful, colorful, flavorful foods. And it is a diet that is not very far off from our very own Canada's Food Guide, which 3/4 of the plate is plant foods and the remaining quarter is protein-rich foods, which can include both plant and animal foods. But I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. What I recommend is at least 9 servings of vegetables and fruits a day, at least 2 servings of legumes, 3 or more servings of whole grains, and at least 1 serving of nuts and seeds. And you anoint it all with a whole lot of wonderfully antioxidant-rich herbs and spices. And the other thing is you need to ensure nutritionally nutritional adequacy, because even if you eat everything on, a plant-based plate, you can still fall short of B12, vitamin D, iodine, EPA, and DHA. And so it needs to be sensibly planned, but that's not a very difficult thing to do. And that's what I've spent my career helping people to do with the books that I've written. Step number 2 is to ditch ultra-processed foods. So what are ultra-processed foods? Well, they're really industrially formulated, energy-dense products made mostly from refined ingredients. And then, of course, we add a bunch of stuff to them. So they're not made with whole foods. And to make UPFs mimic the taste of actual food, and to extend the shelf life, we add things like anti-caking agents, bulking agents, colors, defoaming agents, emulsifiers, flavors, glazing agents, preservatives, and stabilizers. And then we call it food. And it's, and it's not, it's just, it robs the body of nutrients. We're talking about things like sugar sweetened beverages, pre-sweetened breakfast cereals, commercial baked goods, salty snacks, packaged fried noodles, processed meats, and some of the plant-based meats as well, chicken or fish nuggets, fish sticks, most commercial ice creams, processed cheese, oil-based vegan cheese, ready-to-eat pre-prepared foods like pizzas and margarine shortening. And I'm not saying you can never have any of this stuff, but it shouldn't be a key feature in your diet. It should be something very occasional. There was just a study put out in 2024 that looked at the impact of UPFs on health. And they found that they were directly linked to 32 harmful effects, including mortality, but things like obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, cancer, mental health disorders, sleep disorders. And the list goes on. And there are many mechanisms of action by which UPFs do that. They displace healthy foods. So you're not, when you're eating UPFs, you're not eating something that's actually of value. They increase energy intake by an estimated 500 calories a day, increasing your risk of weight gain. They're high in factors that are associated with increased risk of disease, and we already talked a little bit about that. They're high in food additives and in industrial processing products, and this increases inflammation and oxidative stress and contributes to chronic disease. So, and the other thing is they are physically addictive. It's unbelievable. The flavors concentrated in UPF are very dilute in nature. And these are flavors humans are attracted to for survival. And so when a company takes and concentrates these to hit the bliss point, to make the food hyper palatable, it really messes up our appetite control systems, and we can't stop eating them. So they cause such intense cravings that they evoke similar levels of dopamine to that of nicotine and alcohol. It's really quite shocking. And our diets are largely UPF. In Canada, about half of the calories consumed are from UPFs. In the United States, it's closer to 60%. And in some individuals, it's as high as 80%. And of course, these, unhealthy plant-based diets can also be very high in UPFs. Step number 3 is to be very picky about your carbohydrates. And contrary to popular opinion, carbohydrates are not the enemy. Carbohydrates from whole foods are very consistently protective to human health. In fact, the lowest rates of the main chronic diseases that kill 70% of the world's population are actually diets that are relatively high in carbohydrates. So this tells us something. It's really the quality of carbohydrates that determines the health outcomes. And quality is about degree of processing and the source of the carbohydrates. So high quality carbohydrates are carbohydrates that are intrinsic that are naturally a part of whole plant foods. So things like legumes, fruits and vegetables and whole grains and nuts and seeds. These foods, of course, are the foods that are loaded with all the factors we talked about as being protective, like fiber and phytochemicals. Low quality carbohydrates, on the other hand, are carbohydrates that have essentially been stripped of everything of value to human health before we eat them. And then we don't just eat them that way. We tend to add a bunch of stuff before we actually consume them. And so, and this includes sugars, all of the, concentrated sugars, but it also includes starches like white flour and white rice and things like potato chips made from starchy vegetables. And low quality carbohydrates increase our risk of overeating and obesity, metabolic associated fatty liver disease, insulin resistance and diabetes, high triglycerides and heart disease. And most of the carbohydrates that people consume are refined. And therein lies the answer to why they have such a bad reputation. And there was actually an umbrella review on sugar and health in 2023. They looked at over 8,600 articles and 73 meta-analyses, and they found that added sugars had significant harmful associations with 18 endocrine and metabolic outcomes, 10 cardiovascular outcomes, 7 cancer outcomes, and 10 other outcomes. And what did the authors recommend? They recommended that people keep these sugars below 25 grams a day, and that's about 6 teaspoons, and that people don't consume more than 1 serving of sugar sweetened beverage a week. And they defined a serving as 7 to 12 ounces. You go to the movie and order a small pop, and you'll see what you get. It's what, 32 ounces? So, and so how much sugar is actually in food? Well, look at these things here, the top 4 things, soda, a 12-ounce soda, a large flavored coffee, a yogurt, or a cinnamon bun. And you get about double that upper limit that was recommended. That's in one food item. Even in things we don't think of as being sugar sources, like energy bars and barbecue sauce and sweetened cereals, you can get close to that 6 teaspoons. Oh, there we go. And in the United States, and it's probably close in Canada, maybe not quite as much, but in the United States, almost half of the sugar consumed comes from sweet beverages, and almost a third comes from sweets and snacks. So that you eliminate those 2 things, and you're at where you need to be. You're all good. And it's a very similar song and dance for refined starches. So if you take a grain like wheat and you turn it into white flour, you're removing 2 of the 3 parts of the wheat. You're removing the bran and the germ. And the bran is where the fiber is, and there's some minerals, and the germ is where most of the nutrients and phytochemicals are stored. And then what you're left with is endosperm, which is mainly carbohydrate. And in the process of making white flour, you lose 80 to 90% of the fiber, 70 to 80% of the vitamins and minerals, and 95% of the protective phytochemicals. And then who eats a bowl of white flour? Nobody. Nobody eats a bowl of white flour. Before you eat it, you tend to add fat and sugar and salt and food additives, and then you eat the white flour. And that therein lies the problem. We've not only removed all of what is of value to our health, we've added all of these components we know are associated with an increased risk of disease. On the other hand, whole grains are really healthy foods. So there was a 2016 meta-analysis that found that for every 3 servings of whole grain, you reduce the risk of all-cause mortality 17%, cardiovascular mortality 22%, diabetes mortality 51%, total cancer 15%, and respiratory disease mortality 22%. But of course, all whole grains are not created equal. A granola bar doesn't equal a bowl of oatmeal, and a box of Kamut flaked cereal does not equal a Kamut berry salad. There is a hierarchy of whole grains. At 40 Okay. I have there is a higher, I thought I had 40 minutes and I timed my presentation very carefully. So, but are you saying I don't have 40, 30? Okay. Okay. I'll keep going. Okay. So basically there's a hierarchy of whole grains. At the top of the hierarchy and I'll say this hierarchy is predicated upon the degree of processing of the whole grains. And so at the top is intact whole grains, pretty much as they're picked off the plant. Then cut whole grains, then rolled, then shredded, then ground, then flaked, then puffed. And as you go down the hierarchy, you're increasing the surface area of the grain and the rate at which it will be absorbed into the bloodstream. You're increasing exposure to heat, light, oxygen, pressure. So you're diminishing nutrients and you're increasing glycemic index. So you want to stay near the top of the hierarchy as much as possible, eating whole foods. So carbohydrate common sense, get carbohydrates from high fiber, unprocessed or minimally processed whole plant foods, minimize all refined carbohydrates, both starches and sugars, and avoid sugar sweetened beverages. Step 4 is to pick mostly plant-based protein sources. And the reason is really simple. The things in food we want to increase in our diet are concentrated in protein-rich plant foods like legumes. In meat, there's almost none of those compounds. The compounds like saturated fat and trans fatty acids that we're trying to minimize are extremely low in legumes to 0, and they're mainly moderate to high in meat. And if we look at a variety of studies, these studies are just fascinating. They replace 3% of calories from animal protein with plant protein and see what happens. And 3% of calories is 60 calories in a 2,000 calorie diet. That's less than 1 large egg. It's about 1.5 ounces of meat. Okay, so when you look at that, if what we replace is processed meat, we reduce risk of death 34%. If it's eggs, it's 19. If it's unprocessed red meat, it's 12. Dairy, it's 8. And fish and poultry, it's 6. And then there was another study in Japan using the same metric, replacing 3% of plant products with animal products. Red meat, if it was red meat that was being replaced, risk of mortality dropped 34%. If it was processed meat, it dropped 46%. For cancer mortality, it was 42% for red meat, and it was 50% for processed meat. And then finally, the NIH did a study using the same metric in 2020, and I'll just tell you, replacing 3% of animal protein with plant protein reduced risk of overall mortality by 10%. And I'll skip through this. And then there was another umbrella review of 40 meta-analyses that looked at red and processed meat and mortality. And they found high consumption of red and processed meat was associated with higher all-cause mortality and disease risk. For every 3.5 ounce serving or 100 gram serving of red meat per day, risk was increased by 12 to 17% for type 2 diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, and for stroke. And for every 50 grams, so that's 1 3/4 ounce serving of processed meat, it was 37% for diabetes, 27% for heart disease, 17% for stroke, and 15% for all-cause mortality. We see the exact opposite with legumes and mortality. We have a 2023 analysis of 32 cohorts, over 1 million participants, that reported a 6% drop in mortality for every 50 grams or 1/4 cup of legumes consumed. And then there was another study of people 70 years plus that reported a 7 to 8% reduction in mortality for every 2 tablespoons consumed. And that would add up to about a 60 to 68% drop in mortality if you ate 1 cup of beans per day. And Canada's Food Guide also tells us to choose protein foods that come from plants every day. Plant-based protein foods can provide more fiber and less saturated fat than other protein-rich foods. And this can be beneficial for heart health. And they tell us to, instead of having or try replacing meat or poultry with beans and tofu and chickpeas and lentils and so forth. Step number 5, and I'm zipping through, replace harmful sources of fat with healthful sources. So the most healthful sources of fat are monounsaturated fats and polyunsaturated fats. And monos coming mainly from avocados, olives, nuts, and peanuts. Polys coming from seeds, walnuts, and soy foods, and their oils as well. And both types of unsaturated fats support heart health, but polyunsaturated fat seems to be even more beneficial than mono. Replacing saturated fat with unsaturated fat also reduces total mortality risk and the risk of mortality from cancer, neurodegenerative diseases, and respiratory diseases. And whole plant foods are really the most nutritious sources of fat because they come packaged with fiber and phytochemicals and all of those good things. Concentrated fats and oils are more calorically dense, they have fewer nutrients, and they have no fiber. And so while they can be part of a healthy diet, you want to limit them to some extent, especially if you're trying to lose weight. The most harmful fats are trans fats, saturated fats, and oxidized or damaged fats. And trans fatty acids, are the most harmful of all fats. They're strongly linked to death and disease. And industrially produced trans fatty acids have been banned in Canada and the US. They haven't been banned everywhere, but they certainly have been here. But foods can still be labeled trans-free if they contain less than 0.2 grams per serving in Canada and 0.5 in the US. Natural trans fatty acids from meat and dairy are less certain in terms of health impacts, but most experts say minimize all trans fatty acids. Saturated fats are linked to higher overall mortality, certain cancers, insulin resistance, neurodegenerative declines, inflammation, and excess belly fat or visceral fat. And the American Heart Association recommends no more than 5 to 6% of calories from saturated fat to lower cardiovascular disease risk. And the Institute of Medicine recommends keeping saturated fat as low as possible while still eating a healthy diet. So key sources, of course, are animal products and tropical oils. And so how much saturated fat do we actually get from food? Well, we get 16 or more from 2 slices of meat lovers pizza, a double cheeseburger, a soft taco with beef and cheese. So we're over the top with just one item. Even milk and lard and cheese contain a fair bit as well. If you compare that to the amount of saturated fat in plant foods, you can see even the highest fat plant foods are very low in saturated fat. And the one exception is tropical oils and coconut. And oxidized fats are really fats that are formed when we expose foods to very high temperature cooking. And they form products of oxidation like hydroperoxides and aldehydes. And this can contribute to oxidative stress and inflammation. So the bottom line is fat quality matters. We need to limit solid fats, including trans fats and saturated fats, as well as oxidized fats, and include sources of unsaturated fats like nuts, seeds, and avocados in our diet. Step number 6 is to maximize phytochemicals and antioxidants. And these are really things that naturally occur in plant foods that protect against disease. And the main mechanisms of action are they reduce oxidative stress and inflammation. They can enhance the gut microbiome. They improve fasting glucose and insulin sensitivity, and they support immune function. They can also prevent DNA damage, which is one of the first steps in triggering cancer. So the most antioxidant-rich foods are whole plant foods, and then herbs and spices, sprouts, fermented foods, and various teas, green teas and herbal teas. So how do we maximize our intake? Well, we eat a wider variety of plant foods and a mix. That way you'll get a wider variety of phytochemicals and antioxidants. You want to go for color. So for example, because the richest sources are often the most colorful. So you might want to choose purple instead of white onions, black instead of brown rice, dark instead of light greens, for example. You want to eat the entire rainbow of fruits and vegetables. And you know, I recommend at least 3 green, 2 orange, yellow, 2 pink, red, 1 purple, blue, and 1 white, beige every day. And when you're making a salad, try to get it all in there in one big bowl. Eat more raw foods. Raw foods actually contain enzymes that help convert phytochemicals into their active forms, like myrosinase in cruciferous vegetables, which actually helps convert glucosinolates to isothiocyanates like sulforaphane, which may mean nothing to you, but they actually kick into gear phase 2 enzymes, which help to take compounds that are problematic in the body, turn them into water-soluble compounds and help the body to excrete them. And then allanase in allium vegetables converts allan to the active form allicin. Start sprouting. When you sprout a seed, that seed, the phytochemical army in the seed just explodes to protect that new little baby plant. So sprouts contain 5 to 50 times more phytochemicals than their mature counterparts. Pile on the herbs and spices as well and drink antioxidant-rich tea. And finally, step number 7 is to minimize dietary contaminants. So the worst offenders are environmental contaminants and the byproducts of high temperature cooking. And they can do a lot of damage in increasing oxidative stress, fueling inflammation, disrupting hormones, damaging vital organs, and damaging DNA in the central nervous system. Again, being possible triggers for cancer. And by environmental contaminants, we're talking about pesticides in conventional produce, heavy metals like mercury in fish and seafood, arsenic in rice, chicken, fish, and seaweed, persistent organic pollutants that move up the food chain like PCBs and DDT and dioxins, and then microplastics. And this is something that's just starting to get on our radar. And they're most concentrated in seafood, salt, bottled water, processed foods, and food containers. And the main solutions here, just eat lower on the food chain, choose organic when you can, reduce, if rice is a key part of your diet, try to reduce arsenic from rice by choosing aromatic rices from places like India, Pakistan, or Thailand. They have less arsenic. If you buy rice from the US, get it from California instead of the deep south. And then rinse it thoroughly and cook it like you would cook pasta to get rid of about 80% of the arsenic. Eat more quinoa, vary your grains. And for children, try not to overdo the processed rice crackers and all of these rice snacks. And to reduce our exposure to microplastics, we want to limit intake of seafood. Shellfish and small whole fish are the most problematic in terms of microplastics. Salt, Himalayan pink salt, black salt, sea salt are all sources. And then, of course, packaged and processed foods, and avoid single-use plastics. And we won't go into that. And then finally, products of high temperature cooking like heterocyclic amines, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, acrylamide, and advanced glycation end products. And the main sources, heterocyclic amines, are concentrated in they're only found in meat and eggs, animal products, because you require creatine or creatinine to produce them. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons are formed in anything that's blackened. So you don't want to blacken your foods. Acrylamide is found in starchy foods, but most concentrated in potato products because of the asparagine in a potato product, so potato chips, French fries, and advanced glycation end products are most concentrated in fried processed meats like bacon. Solutions here: minimize charred or blackened foods, minimize deep fried foods, and use more moist cooking methods like steaming and stewing and so forth. So the take-home message of this presentation is every time we eat or drink, we either feed disease or we fight disease. We either harm the planet or we help to heal the planet. We either disregard suffering or we extend compassion. And we have a choice. I know not everyone in the world has a choice, but most of us have a choice. And when we consider the consequences of our choices, both for ourselves and beyond ourselves, a plant-based diet becomes not only a rational choice, but an ethical and an ecological imperative. And with that, I will say thank you very much for your attention.
Brenda, thank you very much for a very informative presentation. And I'm sure you've given our audience, both here in Calgary and those online, much to think about and much to consider what we can do. Unfortunately, we do not have enough time to answer questions, but hopefully you're staying for lunch.
Definitely staying, and we'll be very happy to.
Great. So find Brenda and ask all the questions that you want. Great presentation. This concludes our morning session. And at this time, we'll be having lunch in just a few minutes. The food is set up in the back. And I'm sure, especially after all this discussion about food, you've been thinking about it. So we'll be enjoying it. For those of you here, we'll be reconvening at 1 o'clock for our afternoon